This is part 2 of Gin and Trouble, The Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club, Book 5. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Aaron Shedlock and Virginia Rose. Be sure to subscribe to Kathryn's channel where you can find part 3 of Gin and Trouble, along with more of Kathryn's paranormal and contemporary romance novels.
Chapter 11. Frankie. Most people hated working on the weekends, but not me. I loved having the place to myself. No nosy coworkers, no supervisors dumping piles of work on my desk. And thanks to a birthday party at the Marchionni mansion, no chance of running into Dante. I cranked Christmas music and booted up my computer. After laying low for an entire week, I had a mountain of work to catch up on. Plus, I fully intended to access the private databases the Marchionnis use to keep track of international business associates, like my brother. As much as I hated to admit it, Dante had outdone himself when he'd built the software. They were CIA-level good, and I should know. After Yale, I'd turned down a job with the Central Intelligence Agency. Instead, I'd allowed Sophia to convince me to become a corporate spy. The head of security, a tank of a man who made me incredibly nervous, walked past my cube. Thankfully, he didn't stop to chat. He simply nodded and kept moving. The ever-present security team was both a blessing and a curse. A curse, because if anyone was going to figure out what I was up to, it was them. A blessing because the office was the one place I felt safe. It would take a mastermind and some heavy artillery to get into this part of the building. While my brother had the artillery, he wasn't exactly known for his intelligence. I logged into the program I was currently developing to evaluate my latest updates I'd made earlier in the month. With any luck, the algorithms would flag any out-of-the-ordinary behavior as suspicious. So far, the only things it had marked for review were stray cats on the lawn and a handful of sexual acts. I'd programmed it to detect abrupt changes in position and pained facial expressions. In my defense, until I met Dante, I hadn't even considered how the computer would read sex. Nor did I think people would get naked when they knew there were security cameras in the room. I started with the private security feed from the Marchionni mansion and scrolled through the files. I had every intention of starting with the first day I'd missed and working my way through the videos in chronological order. However, now that I had the opportunity to watch Dante in real time, with no chance of getting caught, I couldn't help myself. It's not like I want to see him. I need to know what he's up to. I'm keeping my enemy close. After entering my second set of credentials, I pulled up the live feed from the mansion and was met with a black screen. It took my stressed-out brain several seconds to realize they'd turned the cameras off for the private family function. Interesting. Who's going to be there that they don't want anyone to see? That was the thing about continuous monitoring. Security footage could be leaked to the police, the press, and anyone else. All you had to do was find the right employee to bribe. Mob families, even supposedly former mob families, often entertained criminals, celebrities, and dignitaries that would rather not make their associations known. I powered up one camera at a time until I found a feed with activity, checked for Dante, and moved on to the next. I finally found him in the backyard talking to Marco. From the looks of it, they were having a good time. I miss him so damned much. Sure, I'd known him as Danny, but I'd come to realize that he was absolutely the same online as in person. Sweet, intelligent, wickedly funny, all mixed together with a hint of awkward. I caught myself caressing the screen and sighed. In moments I could only describe as temporary insanity, I dreamed of telling Dante my real name. In my fantasy world, he'd take me in his arms and tell me my last name didn't matter. When I really let myself go wild, I'd imagine him offering to help me and Sophia bring my brother down. Yeah, right. Like the Marchionnis would help the Abruzzos. I'd wasted enough time hoping Dante would fly his X-Wing fighter into the Death Star and save the universe. Sophia and I were on our own, and time was running out for Valentina. I opened a new window and aligned it beside the live feed. I was, after all, the queen of multitasking. It had taken me months to hack into Dante's super-secret program, but I'd put it to good use since. His software created an interface between several government entities, including the Federal Aviation Administration, federal, state, and local law enforcement, and even the booking systems of larger hotel chains. After entering in the numeric identifier for the Abruzzo family jet, I pressed search and sat back to wait for a hit. Like I said, my brother was an idiot. It would never occur to him that anyone could track his plane. Movement on the video feed from the mansion caught my attention, and I glanced over in time to see Dante walking away. I slid the mouse to close the window, but hesitated when Marco scowled. What's going on? Not 30 seconds ago, he was all smiles and laughter. Marco took out his phone, stabbed the screen, and pressed it to his ear. Since I couldn't read lips, and the feed didn't have audio, I had no idea what he was saying, but he looked angry. Very angry. An alert popped up in the flight records, and my heart stopped. Tommaso is here? In New Orleans? Oh, shit. No. I fumbled for my cell and called Soph. Miss me already? She sounded happy, probably because she had our apartment to herself for the first time in a week. I hated to ruin her good mood, but she needed to know what was happening. Tommaso's plane left Sicily Thursday. She inhaled and exhaled several times before speaking. Do you know where it landed? Lakeshore, Mississippi. It's close, just over the state line. I typed the information into another database and accessed the flight manifest. I don't recognize any of the names on the passenger list. There's no way to know if he was on the plane. Her voice hardened. It's him or his men. Either way, we need to leave the city. I glanced back at the video feed. Nicolina and Marco are in town for the birthday party. Tommaso could be here for them. I'm surprised he hasn't taken a shot at them before now. Maybe. Any idea when they arrived? Not until I review last week's footage at the mansion. I pressed my hand to my chest in hopes of slowing my racing heart. Their security in New Orleans is a lot laxer than at the compound in Comiso. She sighed. Tommaso's timing is suspect, but we can't be sure. We need to get out of New Orleans. I can't. Not until I see if I can access security feeds from the airport. If I can find the license plate of the car Tommaso took, I might be able to figure out where he's staying. It doesn't matter where he's staying. We're leaving. The sounds of doors opening and closing filled the line. Why haven't the DNA results come back yet? I'd wondered the same thing. According to the lab, we should have received the report in the mail in 3 to 5 business days. No clue. I'll call Monday and ask when they were sent. She continued what I assumed was packing. Are you on your way yet? Running was the last thing I wanted to do. We couldn't help Valentina from the road, but we weren't safe in New Orleans. Not until my brother, and the Marchionnis who could recognize me, left town. Tommaso wouldn't hesitate to put me and Sophia on a plane back to Sicily by any means necessary. Nico and Evelyn presented another problem. They could recognize me and blow my cover. Maybe I should stay here until nightfall. Sophia must have heard the anxiety in my voice, because for once, she lowered hers. Frankie, listen to me. We knew this day would come. We have a plan. We need to stick to it. We did have a plan. A good one. The problem was, I'd already screwed it up by taking the previous week off. Tommaso had been close for 3 days without my knowledge. He could be anywhere by now. I stood and glanced around the empty room, as if I expected my brother to come barreling in any moment. My guess is he's hiding out and having his goons watch Marchionni properties. You think they're watching this building? Is it safe for me to walk out of here? I don't know, she sighed. But you can't stay there forever. Come home. I'm scared, Soph. Keep your head down and stick with crowds as much as possible. Remember, they don't know we're here. They're probably looking for an opportunity to take a shot at Marco or Enzo. Oh, God. Losing another brother will kill Dante. I should warn Dante. The words fell out before I could stop them. No, you should come the fuck home so we can get out of town. Over the previous year, I'd convinced myself I was a badass. I mean, I'd infiltrated the enemy's organization, hacked into super-secret databases, and evaded my psychopath brother. Hell, I'd stabbed a man and stolen his blood. However, the second I was in real danger, I panicked like a wet chihuahua. What if one of his men recognizes me? I could lead him to our house. Then what? He kidnaps us? Or worse? Someone touched my shoulder and my body went into panic-induced autopilot. Years of self-defense and martial arts training kicked in on a subconscious level. Before I realized what was happening, I shot to my feet and throat-punched my assailant. Grabbing his arm, I plowed my shoulder into his gut and rode him to the ground. Fucking hell, Julia, it's me, Dante coughed between each word. Oh, shit. I jumped off him and scrambled to close the windows on my computer. Rubbing his throat, Dante sat upright. Are you okay? Why wouldn't I be okay? I mean, besides you scaring the daylights out of me? I glanced around for my phone. I'd dropped it at some point in the melee and was pretty sure Sophia was still on the line. She did not need to hear this. I heard your half of the conversation. He coughed again and rolled his shoulder. Were you eavesdropping on me? Part of me was angry, part was terrified, and a bigger part was so glad to see him I could hardly breathe. He held up his hand as if to ward off another attack. No, you were shouting when I came in. Oh. I stepped around him and scoured the area for my phone. I'm fine, really. Dante stood, grabbed my upper arms, and turned me to face him. You're not fine. Is someone stalking you? Do we need to call the police? Stalking me? It took me a second to catch on. He'd heard enough to jump to the wrong conclusions, but I wasn't sure how to respond. The last thing I needed was for him to call the authorities. Dante pulled my phone out from under my chair and handed it to me. I put the cell to my ear and swore under my breath. Just my luck. Sophia was still on the line. Hey, sis. Sorry about that. I dropped the phone. Is that Chewbacca? She kept her voice low, likely so he couldn't overhear her side of the conversation. Yes, one of my coworkers is here with me. He lives in the building, right? I didn't like the change in her tone, or where I assumed she was going with the line of questioning. Yes. Get him to invite you to stay with him. Is she serious? I'm feeling much better. I'll be home shortly. Sophia sighed. Don't be stupid. There's nowhere safer for you. Stay there, work, keep tabs on Tommaso. I'll stick to our original plan and leave town. I don't think so. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I managed to keep my voice steady. I'll pack a bag for you and leave it by the front door. Have that nerdy coworker of yours pick it up. Okay, but look in my bottom dresser drawer. I'm not packing your vibrator, Sophia deadpanned. Holding back tears, I laughed for her sake. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd never see her again. I hid your Christmas present there. No, I'm leaving it. We'll be together for Christmas. I promise. She disconnected. Are you seriously planning to go home? You're not walking out of here alone. Either call the cops or I will. He stood taller and folded his arms as if daring me to argue. But the concern in his eyes ruined the effect. I hated it, but Sophia was right. As long as I stayed inside the building, I was safe. Plus, I needed to find a way to warn Dante his family was in danger. The police can't help. If someone's threatening you, no, you don't understand. Think, Frankie, think. The guy bothering me is a cop. I tried to get a restraining order, but it didn't work. He has a perfect record. The judge believed him over me. Dante arched an eyebrow. That sounds like a plot to a Nicholas Sparks movie. Great, just great. I put every ounce of fear and frustration I had into glaring at Dante. Are you making fun of my situation? Not at all. He rubbed the back of his neck and glanced up through his lashes. Sorry, I wasn't born with a brain-to-mouth filter. Sophia's words bounced around my skull. I hated the idea of staying with him, but what choice did I have? None. Not unless I want to end up dead, or worse, in an arranged marriage. The adrenaline leached from my bloodstream, leaving me exhausted and weepy. Or maybe the reality of my situation had finally broken me. Dante pulled me into an embrace. It's okay. I've got you. Is your sister safe? I sagged against him. He was warm and strong and smelled so damn good. She's going out of town for a few days. He eased back, far enough to meet my gaze. If you don't want to go to the police, I'll have someone from the security team shadow you for a few days. Do they do that? As far as I knew, the Marchionnis had given up their muscle when they'd left the mafia. What remained were the men who guarded the building, and a small team that worked at the mansion. If they were looking out for me, there would be fewer men to protect Dante's family. I couldn't allow it. Not the guys you know here, but my parents have private security. He seemed to realize he'd misspoken and frowned. Damn it. They'll have their hands full with my mother and Marco in town. What about the rest of your family? Why don't you all have protection? I knew the answer, but part of me hoped Marco's visit meant they'd tightened security for all of the Marchionnis. Dante tensed. We're businessmen. Why would we need bodyguards? You wouldn't, I guess. I hated that we were both forced to twist the truth to protect our families. But I noticed some pretty scary-looking guys on the security feed from the mansion. Marco and my mom are a different story because they do most of their business overseas. Not everywhere is as safe as the U.S. The U.S. doesn't feel all that safe either. I hated the idea of living with him. He seemed to like to touch me. Touching would lead to kissing, which would lead to more touching, which would end in disaster. Sleeping on the chaise in the ladies' room wouldn't be that bad, would it? I thought of Valentina locked in my family's ancestral home, waiting to be married to a monster of a man. If I had any hope of helping her, I had to steer clear of my brother long enough to get the DNA results. To do that, I needed access to Dante's computer network. He met my gaze and broke my already cracked heart. I'll do everything I can to keep you safe. I used the fresh tears filling my eyes to my advantage. Clinging to him, I pretended to be the kind of woman I hated. How? I can't go home to an empty apartment. Stay at my place. The way he'd blurted out the invitation made me wonder if he'd thought about what he'd said before he said it. But I could work with that. If you're sure it isn't too much trouble. I offered him a soft smile, but drew the line at batting my lashes. I had some pride left. Damn it.
Chapter 12. Dante. I stood in the entryway, watching Julia walk into my place. To live. With me. We'd gone from not speaking for an entire week to cohabitating in the course of a few minutes. I had questions about the person harassing her, but there'd be time for that when she'd had a chance to settle in. Having her in my space was a big deal. A very big deal. Oddly enough, I'd never felt more certain of anything in my life. We belonged together. Marco doesn't know jack crap about relationships. Julia set her purse and laptop bag beside the couch and turned to me. I knew her inside and out, but we hadn't spent enough time together for me to read her facial expressions. If I had to guess, I'd say she'd gone past second thoughts and was working on round 6 or 7. Let me show you around. I made a grand sweeping motion and used my best English butler imitation. This is the living room and my new sleeping quarters. She wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to make herself smaller. I'm not kicking you out of your bed. Good to know. Which side do you prefer, the right or left? It was a lame attempt at humor, but I had to do something to lighten the mood. Julia rolled her eyes, but I'd managed to get a quick smile out of her. I'll take the couch. Suit yourself, but it's lumpy and sheets don't stay on the leather. I guided her into the kitchen. There isn't much food, but the restaurant downstairs will send up anything on the menu. There's also a grocery nearby that delivers. The number is on the fridge. I'm not sure I can afford that. Would it be okay if I had Iris from IT bring me a few things? Sure, or you can give me a list. Although I recalled her telling me she helped support her sisters, it surprised me she was worried about buying food. While I don't know her exact salary, I knew we paid our staff well. She nodded, but the more we spoke, the more uncomfortable she seemed. I needed to hurry this along, sit her down with a glass of wine, and rub her feet before she bolted. That's pretty much it, except the bedroom and my office. Julia perked up a bit. Can I see the Batcave? I don't know. Are you sure you can handle it? I rubbed my chin as if unsure if I should grant her request. She swatted my arm. Show it to me or I'll be forced to sneak in after you're asleep. Ow, hey, no more assault and battery, ninja woman. Julia bit her lower lip. Did I hurt you earlier? My shoulder answered with a throb, but I shook my head. Those were some impressive moves. Did they teach you to fight like that at boarding school? My dad insisted I take self-defense training. Right, I remember now. You loved it so much you enrolled in martial arts classes. I led her down the hall and stopped outside the hidden door. She stared as if shocked I remembered the details of her life. Surprise, sweetheart. I never forget things that are important to me. Rubbing my hands together, I did my best Joker imitation. Ready to dance with the devil in the pale moonlight? That's so cute, you think you're scary. Well, mister, I've seen Scary, and you don't have his smile. She didn't miss a beat with her Harley Quinn impersonation. I liked it. I liked it a hell of a lot, and so did my cock. Clearing my throat, I muttered, Never do that again unless we're naked. Julia's eyes widened, but I couldn't tell if she was offended or amused. Hurry up, the suspense is killing me. As you wish. Pressing the secret button, I opened the door and took a flourished bow. The woman of my dreams walked inside my favorite place on the planet and stopped in her tracks. Wow, this is... She shook her head. I expected it to be the size of a guest bedroom. I couldn't help but smile. One of the things I loved most about her, besides her love of all things geek, was her appreciation for tech. This used to be a separate studio apartment. I had the original entrance closed off and this door installed. She took a few more tentative steps. There's so much. I don't know what to admire first. This setup is for my day job. I nodded to a semicircle-shaped desk with 3 monitors. But you're not here for the boring stuff. That's boring? She laughed. It's like the Taj Mahal compared to my cubicle. Resting my hand on the small of her back, I guided her deeper into my lair. There's a fridge, snack cabinet, and microwave over there. Nice. Julia gasped and practically ran to my collection of old-school arcade games. Of course, she stopped to caress the rarest one. Is this an original Williams Blaster cockpit? Yes, ma'am. I wiggled my brows. Holding her arms out wide, she spun in a circle like the nun-turned nanny from Sound of Music. How do you get any work done in here with so many distractions? Who says I work? I nodded to the specially made gaming chairs and ginormous monitor. That's where I play with you every night. She settled into the Scandinavian-style lounger. It's amazingly comfortable. No wonder you're able to go for so long. I bit back another inappropriate comment. She'd had a bad day, and I sure as hell didn't want to scare her off by coming on to her. But Julia in that chair was making it, and me, hard. The curved design positioned her body in the most intriguing way. I'm talking knees raised, back arched, breasts up. Awesomeness. My mind immediately conjured images of her stretched across the butter-soft leather. naked. Get a grip, Marchionni. She's here because she's in danger, not to play with your joystick. I seated myself in the adjacent chair. I'll send someone to your place to pick up your things. Just make another list. I'll have my sister pack a bag for me before she leaves town, and have my friend drop it off tomorrow. Her eye twitched and her smile deflated. I was beginning to wonder if the eye thing was a nervous tic or a tell. Are you sure you can wait that long? As long as you have an extra toothbrush and some sweats, I'll be fine. Her plastic smile returned. I can't thank you enough for letting me stay here. It's what friends do for each other. The word tasted bitter, but we had to start somewhere. So, friends it was, for now. Glancing around, she said, I'm sorry I ghosted you this past week. Did you really have the flu? More like a terminal case of embarrassment. Julia plucked imaginary lint from her jeans. I'm pretty sure your brother thinks I cut him on purpose. A sane man would have denied it to make her feel better, but having her in my apartment had me feeling a lot of things, and sane wasn't one of them. Enzo's always been eccentric. She perked up a bit. What's he like? He's a bit of a loner. Before he met Shauna, he was a serious pain in the ass. He still is sometimes, but she's good for him. Pain in the ass how? Is he nice? I mean, is he a good guy? Her interest in my brother surprised me, and if I'm honest, it freaked me the hell out. Enzo had said she'd come on to him. Was he telling the truth? Like I said, he's eccentric, more artsy than the rest of us. She turned, giving me her full attention. What does that mean? Give me an example. Well, he's the Michelangelo of food. And the eccentric part? Julia seemed to hang on my every word as if we were discussing a freaking rock star instead of Enzo. He's convinced you not only stabbed him on purpose, but kept one of the bloody bandages as a souvenir. It was a total dick move to tell her that, but what can I say? I was straight up jealous. Julia recoiled. Wrapping her arms around her middle, she nodded. Smooth one, Marchionni. Hey, I held her hand. He's only half serious. I think he was playing it up to get under my skin. Because we're friends? Because he knows I'm crazy about you. Something like that. She grew quiet, too quiet. I could practically hear the thoughts pinging around in her beautiful head. Not ready for the conversation to end, I blurted out, I've decided to resign from Marchionni Corporation. Her entire body tensed. Before you freak out, it makes business sense for me to start my own cybersecurity firm. Since my family streamlined our operations, my workload has decreased. Streamline was a nice way of putting selling off any entity with ties to the Cosa Nostra. That's great, Dante. She pulled her hand free and brushed her hair from her face. While I hadn't expected her to throw herself into my arms and proclaim we could be together, I'd hoped for a bit more of a reaction. Julia sighed. It's been a long day. Once again, the thought of her leaving gave me a case of verbal diarrhea. The cop you're afraid of, were you tracking him with my software? She looked away. Yes. I'd approved her security clearance and granted her access to certain computer networks and programs, not including the one I'd caught her using. You hacked your way in? I did, but in my defense, I didn't do it to steal your code or introduce a virus. I needed to know his whereabouts. You mean your ex? Julia nodded without meeting my gaze. Are you going to revoke my access? Not a chance. We pay you to do exactly what you did. I took her hand and brought it to my lips. I know you're tired, but would you show me how you got into my supposedly impenetrable program? She sat up and rubbed her hands on her thighs. I'd love to show off my mad skills. There she is. I knew the woman I loved was in there somewhere. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Should we go back downstairs? You can use one of my computers. I stood and walked to my desk. Log in as yourself. Julie went through the same procedure to access the network as any other employee, but after she was connected to the server, she worked some sort of voodoo magic that had my head spinning. Whoa there, Speedy. Slow down so I can follow. Grinning, she made a show of typing with only her index fingers. Better? Much. I leaned over her shoulder to get a better look at her process and caught a whiff of her hair. Ginger and citrus and honey had never smelled so damn good. I'm thankful for your brilliant mind and mad hacking skills. What would you like to banish? Everything that has ever hurt you. I rested my hand on her shoulder. Her breath hitched and she mistyped a key or two. Pay attention, Dante. This is the weak spot. I had a weak spot, all right, but it has nothing to do with my program. Edging closer to her ear, I whispered, I'm watching. Julia surprised the hell out of me by tilting her head toward me. I discovered a flaw while penetration testing. Between her brilliant mind and sexy voice, my self-control hung by a single optical fiber. Tell me more about your penetration testing. You're talented, but I can break down your defenses with one hand behind my back. She reached behind her and squeezed my thigh without missing a beat. This woman is killing me. A few more strokes, and I'm in. Her hand moved higher as she added the final line of code and hacked into my supposedly secure program. Shocked and incredibly aroused, I didn't quite know how to respond. I'll be damned. I can fix it for you if you'd like. She turned to face me and licked her lips. Wouldn't want you to get a backdoor Trojan, unless you're into that sort of thing. I much prefer to plug into main ports. I brushed her hair from her eyes. We'll work on the code together. On the clock. Good thinking. It's dangerous to mix business with pleasure. Julia nuzzled against my palm. I'd never wanted to kiss a woman more than I wanted to kiss her, and still, I hesitated. She was definitely flirting, but that wasn't exactly new. We'd spent hours online dropping double entendres and teasing each other to the point of insanity. Of course, she hadn't grabbed my thigh over the computer. Before I could make up my mind how to proceed, the doorbell rang. Julia startled as if the noise had snapped her back to reality. Wide-eyed, she leaped to her feet and backed away. The fear in her eyes broke my freaking heart. You're safe here. It's probably the dinner I ordered earlier. She glanced around and sighed. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. I cracked a grin to ease the tension. Other than denting my ego by hacking my system. I shouldn't have led you on. Her chin quivered. It's just, it felt like the old us. I miss the way things were before we met. Me too, babe. Me too. But I know how to get us back to normal.
Chapter 13. Frankie. Suck it, you big hairy mutant! I leaped from the gaming chair and took a victory lap around the room. We'd lost hours playing the video game. It was pure escapism, and exactly what I needed. I couldn't stop smiling. That was freaking incredible. I thought for sure that orc was going to swallow you whole. Laughing, Dante pushed to his feet. I need to crash while I still have some pride left. Come on, Danny, one more. As soon as the name left my lips, the dark cloud that had followed me since the convention returned. Hey, he captured my chin and turned my face up to his. I'm sorry. I should have told you my real name from the get-go. But I'm still me. I couldn't hold his gaze, not without feeling like a complete hypocrite. He might have given me a fake name, but at least he wasn't a DNA-stealing, computer-hacking spy. Dante stared until I glanced up. I didn't want to scare you off, or worse. Worse? He shrugged. It's hard to know if people care about me or my family's money and reputation. The weight of his words threatened to crush me. I knew firsthand what it was like to live in the shadow of your father's illegal activities, but my experience was different. Outside of Sicily, the Abruzzo name wasn't as well known as the Marchionnis, and it certainly wasn't immediately associated with the Cosa Nostra. Scare me off because of the mafia? The words fell out before I could stop them. Maybe I was born without a brain-to-mouth filter, too. Dante released my chin and did exactly what I'd come to expect from him. Cracked a joke. I'd tell ya, but I'd have to kill ya. I remember the scandal with your father and the mayor on the news last year. That had to be hard. I played with fire bringing it up, but I'd always had a terminal case of curiosity. Plus, as much as I hated his family, I cared about him. Although lately, I'd begun to wonder if the Marchionnis were as awful as my family had made them out to be. Hard is an understatement. He brushed my hair back from my face and kissed my forehead. "It's late. Let's get some sleep." His touch was feather light, but I felt it everywhere. I must have been born without a brain-to-body filter, because I slid my arms around him and pressed close, too close, and not close enough. Dante hesitated for 1, 2, 3 heartbeats before slanting his mouth over mine. The moment our lips touched, whatever had held him back seemed to vanish. His arms snaked around my waist, and his fingers threaded through my hair. It was a kiss that never should have happened, a forbidden pleasure, the sweet taste of poison before it stops your heart. And I won it. I felt the moment his brain got in the way of our pleasure. I had no idea what he was thinking, but he'd slowed down when I wanted him to speed up. He'd pulled back when I needed him to give me more. He'd released me when I wanted him to hold tighter. Dante pressed his brow to mine and closed his eyes. Drawing a deep breath, he whispered, "Julia, my God, you have no idea how much I've wanted to do that again, but it's been a long day." I wrapped my arms around my middle to stop the sinking feeling in my gut. He stared as if unsure how to respond. "For both of us. I'll get the extra bedding." What was I thinking? I'd grossly underestimated his effect on me when I'd rooked him into inviting me to stay at his place. I couldn't let my guard down again, even for a second. Despite what Dante had said, everything had changed when I found out who he was and was not. Danny was a myth. A funny, charming, kind myth with a last name like Jones or Smith. Not Marchionni. Dante led me to the hall closet and pulled out a pillow and blanket. "You sure you don't want me to run to your place and pick up your things?" The last thing I wanted was Dante in my apartment. Not that Sophia and I had family photos laying around, but I couldn't be sure he wouldn't find something with our real names on it. "I'll call Iris. She can bring my bag to work tomorrow." I grabbed the pillow and hugged it to my chest. Everything was fine until I made the mistake of drawing a deep breath. It smelled like spiced wood and sex and him. My body reacted instantly. Dante must have noticed because he cleared his throat. "Are you sure you can go without until then?" "I'm not planning to leave this apartment." I turned and walked into the living room with him on my heels. Dante seemed to have more to say, but shook his head. "Why don't you take the bed? I'm telling you, that sofa is like sleeping on a lumpy park bench." "I'll be fine. I promise." I toed off my shoes, slipped out of my cardigan, and sat. He wasn't kidding about the couch. It looked soft, but felt like leather-covered concrete. He gave me a slow once-over. Judging by the heat in his stare, I wasn't the only one having a physical reaction. "I'll get you something to sleep in." Before I could respond, Dante disappeared down the hall. His concern for my comfort gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling. A warm, fuzzy feeling with the potential to ruin me. What was I thinking coming here, kissing him? Too nervous to sit, I called Iris. "Julia, where are you? I stopped by your house today and no one was home." She seemed nervous. Then again, this was Iris. The woman lived on Red Bulls and sugar. "I'm staying with Dante for a while. There's some trouble with my brother." "Dante? As in Dante Inferno in my pants Marchionni?" "There will be no fires, but yes." I wandered to his bookcase and skimmed the titles. The books were a mixture of technical manuals and classic novels, a far cry from the comics in his Batcave. If I didn't know better, I'd swear I was in someone else's apartment. Everything from the ultra-modern coffee table to the stiff leather couch seemed generic. Expensive, expertly designed, but bland. Iris sighed and lowered her voice. Weird, considering she lived alone.
Is this a good idea? I mean, he lied to you. Can you really trust him?
It's just for a few days. I loved her. She was my only friend in New Orleans. But I instantly regretted telling her what had happened the weekend of the gaming convention. Can you do me a favor? Could you swing by my house and pick up my overnight bag? It'll be by the door. You still have the key, right?
Sure. I can do that. But you should stay with me. I don't trust anyone who's that rich and handsome. He's going to break your heart again.
Dante returned wearing a pair of low-slung PJ pants and a dark t-shirt. One look at the way the cotton stretched across his chest and his messy curls, and my nipples hardened. I'm in trouble. Big trouble. Maybe I should stay with Iris. Thanks, but I'll be okay here for a few days. See you tomorrow?
Yeah, sure. See you then.
I disconnected the call. That was Iris. She said she'd get my things for me. That's good. He handed me a pair of basketball shorts, sweats, a t-shirt, and a men's undershirt. I wasn't sure if you preferred thick pajamas or if you slept hot. Thanks. I took the clothes from him without confirming or denying what I liked to sleep in. You don't spend much time out here, do you? Not really. I pretty much live in my office. He glanced around the boring room. I'm looking forward to getting my own digs once I open my company. The glint in his eye made me nervous. I couldn't tell if he was excited about the new business venture or what it could mean for our relationship. Leave it to Sophia to come up with an easily dodgeable lie. I needed to put some distance between us before I lost the battle of wills with my body. Again. Good night. Good night. He gave me one last curious glance and walked down the hall. I had no idea how long I stared at the ceiling thinking about Dante sprawled out in what I imagined to be a king-sized bed. My sex-deprived brain conjured up delicious images of dark skin on darker sheets. His hair a mess, his expression boyish and innocent with sleep. His body all man and anything but innocent. To distract myself, I pulled out my phone and sent Sophia a text. Me. Where are you? Sophia. Where are you? Me. Where do you think? Sophia. Sleeping with the enemy. Me. Sleeping on the couch. No enemy in sight. Sophia. Join him. Could be fun.
Is she kidding?
Me.
Are you seriously telling me to sleep with him?
I waited for what seemed like forever for her to reply, but she never did. Typical Sophia. At some point, I must have fallen asleep on the world's most uncomfortable sofa because a sound echoed in the back of my mind. I fought the urge to wake. Some dreams, especially the ones starring Dante, were too good to give up. However, keys jangling and the front door opening worked better than a bucket of ice water to force me back to reality. Bolting upright, I took in the light filtering in through the gaps in the blinds and the leading man of my naughty dreams. What time is it? A little after noon. I come bearing gifts. Dante set a bakery bag and an enormous coffee on the kitchen island. Oddly, the scent of pine followed him through the apartment. Thanks, but you didn't have to do that. I stood and did my best not to wince at the ache in my back. Whoever had designed that couch had a career in medieval torture devices. Why do you smell like a Christmas tree? I bought one this morning. Oh, wow. I wish I could have gone with you. I hadn't celebrated the holidays since I'd left Sicily, but decking the halls with Dante could be fun. I must not have been fully conscious because I slipped into one hell of a daydream. A daydream of Dante in red silk boxers and a Santa hat, reaching up to hang ornaments on the top branches, muscles straining, the deep V from his hips to his ground control to Julia. The real, fully clothed and hatless Dante handed me the coffee. "Drink. It'll help with the game hangover." "Thanks." I took a sip but doubted a caffeine infusion would cure what ailed me. "Is the tree downstairs? I'm pretty good at decorating." "I bought it for Leo." He turned to the cupboard, but not before I caught his frown. It wasn't his typical, "why are you arguing with me" sort of frown. This seemed more distant, as if the memory of a lost loved one had crossed his mind. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." He waved as if to physically change the subject. "What time is your friend dropping off your bag?" "I'm not sure." I walked back to the couch and checked my phone. It struck me as odd that Iris hadn't reached out. The woman was one of those annoying morning people. "Nothing yet. Let me send her a text." Dante didn't reply. In fact, he hadn't moved a muscle since I'd walked away. He stood there, staring at the cabinet door. What's going on with him? "Are you sure you're all right?" "No, I'm decidedly not all right." His words came out in a hushed growl, as if keeping the volume down had taken the last of his patience. My chest tightened. Had he gone to my apartment? No, that was impossible. I'd used a fake address on my application. Then what? Had he somehow figured out who I was? Was it his father's health? Marco? Had Tommaso made an attempt on one of his brother's lives? Dante set a plate in front of me and narrowed his eyes. "We're good, right? You and me? We're friends?" I could hardly breathe. "Yes, of course. What's wrong?" He opened his mouth as if to speak, but sighed and waved his hand. Family crap. The longer he delayed, the faster my pulse raced. "If you want to talk about it..." "It's fucking Leo." Dante scrubbed both hands through his hair. "He's a goddamned idiot." "Why do you say that?" Two things about what he'd said surprised me. I didn't know Leo well, but I would never describe him as an idiot. Moody? Serious? Brooding? Yes. Idiot? No. Second, I'd never heard Dante drop the F-bomb. Whatever had happened had thrown him for a loop. Brow furrowed, he removed a chocolate croissant from the bag and placed it on the plate. "Eat. This might take a while." I slid onto a bar stool and sipped my coffee. "Leo calls this morning bright and early, practically demanding I get him a tree and a goldfish." Dante motioned to the pastry. "That's random." I took a bite to appease him, but had to hold back a moan when the buttery goodness hit my taste buds. "Yes and no." He sat beside me. "Leo has a friend, Dahlia. They hadn't spoken in months, but she was at the birthday party yesterday. She's having the same problem as you, only it's not an ex, just some random weirdo." I nodded, though I had no idea where he was going with the story. "She has a stalker?" "Yeah. Basically, the guy broke into her house, and she's staying with Leo until things settle." I didn't think that made him an idiot. More like a hero, or at least a stand-up kind of man. Either way, Leo wasn't the first Marchionni to swoop in and protect a woman. Besides what Dante had done for me, Marco had rescued Nico. If the rumors were true, Enzo and Gabe had risked their lives for the women they loved. "Are all of the men in your family programmed to rescue damsels in distress?" Dante seemed to consider the question, frowned, and nodded. "Yeah, I guess we are." The way he talked about his family, how he went out at the crack of dawn to help his brother, the way he'd invited me into his home. Dante was exactly the kind of man I wanted to spend my life with. Only there were no happily ever afters for an Abruzzo and a Marchionni, no matter how much we wanted it. The croissant turned to a brick in my belly. "I'm confused." "Leo helping her isn't the problem. He stood and paced the floor between the island and the counter. "The thing is, she has a son. My family knows about the kid, but none of us had met him. Until today." The more he talked, the more I felt like I was missing something. "You met him?" Dante stopped moving and turned to me. "Yep. He's 2.5 and freaking adorable. His name is Gunnar, and there's no doubt he's Leo's." Whoa! I did not see that coming. I thought I'd misunderstood, but the look of utter frustration on his face told me otherwise. "Leo knows he's the father?" "I assume so." I tried to put myself in Dante's place. How would I feel if one of my sisters had a secret child? Betrayed? Hurt? Sure. But his reaction seemed off, as if he were taking it personal. But why? I'm sure he had his reasons for keeping quiet. I'm sure he did. But things have changed, and he's still hiding his son from our family. He pressed his lips together and glanced away. I recognized the pain in his eyes. I wore the same angry, devastated, lost expression every time I thought about my dad. That's it. That's what's bugging him. "You're upset because your father may not get the chance to meet Gunnar." Dante whipped his head in my direction. He smiled for a half a heartbeat before it melted away. "It's crazy how well you know me." I could have said the same thing to him. He knew me better than anyone else on the planet, my sisters included. Except my name, why I was working for his family, why I'd stolen his brother's blood, who I was running from, why I was running, my sister's alleged involvement with his oldest brother's death. I could have gone on and on. I cleared my throat and my racing thoughts. Like I said, I'm sure Leo had his reasons for keeping his son a secret. Sitting beside me, Dante took my hands in his, met my gaze, and said the absolute last thing I expected. "Probably the same reasons I didn't tell you my real name. He wanted to keep Gunnar and Dahlia safe from the mafia."
Chapter 14. Dante. Rule 1 of Fight Club is, you do not talk about Fight Club. Only I wasn't discussing a Brad Pitt movie. I told Julia something I'd never told another living soul, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why I'd done it. Okay, that was a lie. I knew why. I told her because me lying about my name had hurt her, and I needed her to understand why I'd used an alias. More than that, I needed her to trust me. And more than that, I wanted Julia to know all of me. The good, the bad, the mafioso. Unfortunately, I'd zigged when I should have zagged and failed to realize telling the woman you're falling in love with you used to be involved with the mob doesn't instill trust. In fact, if her bugged-out eyes were any indication, telling her had the opposite effect. "We're out now." I took her trembling hands in mine. "There's nothing to worry about. You're safe here with me, I swear it." She swallowed hard. "Should you be telling me any of this? Aren't there rules?" "Yes, but I'm sick of the decisions my father and grandfather and great-great-great-grandfather made, costing me the people that I love." Julia winced. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, how much more can I screw this up? Fearing she'd bolt, I tightened my grip. "That came out wrong. I didn't mean you." "I see." Apparently, my screwing up knows no freaking bounds. I chose my next words carefully. "I am completely falling for you, and yes, I lied because I wanted to make absolutely sure it was safe. I let my fears about what happened to my brother Joe and his wife get in the way of our relationship." The color drained from her face. I'd told her about their car accident, but I hadn't gone into the details, namely that they had been murdered. Once again, I tasted shoe leather. She looked everywhere except at me. "Dante, No, not happening. I'm not going to listen to her tell me why we can't be together." "I'm sorry. I know it's a lot to take in." Holding my hands up, I backed out of the kitchen. "I'll shut up, but please, don't leave. Not with your ex out there somewhere." "I'm not leaving. And I'm glad you told me. It's just..." Julia gave me a sad smile and wrapped her arms around me. We should talk. Unlike the night before, her embrace lacked heat. Hell, it lacked warmth. It reminded me of the hundreds of hugs from strangers I'd received at my brother's funeral, tidy and full of pity. It dawned on me too damn late that I should have kept my mouth shut. She'd been through a lot in the previous 24 hours and didn't need my crap on top of it. What was it about this woman that had me taking one step forward and 6 miles back? About what? I pulled away to give her space, but mostly to let her off the hook. I didn't appreciate fake hugs any more than I appreciated fake orgasms. My family. She tugged at the t-shirt she'd borrowed from me the night before. It took a lot of guts for you to tell me about the mafia. Well... My phone chirped, and not just with a standard alert. I'd programmed the notification to go off even when the cell was set to silence, set the default volume loud enough to be heard over a rock concert, and roll over to any PC or laptop I happened to be logged into. The 3 rapid beeps told me the Abruzzo's plane was on the move. I hated to interrupt Julia, but with my mother and Marco in town for Rocco's birthday party, I couldn't ignore the alert. I'm sorry, but I have to take care of that. My God, that's as loud as a tornado siren. Is it a security breach? Julia followed me into the Batcave. Something like that. I turned to tell her to wait in the living room, but what was the point? She knew about my family, the Cliff's Notes version anyway. What difference would it make if she got a true glimpse into my world? It could freak her out. Or the tech could intrigue her enough to work for my new company. Or this could all blow up in my face. Forcing myself to focus, I logged into my computer, the Marchionni network, and finally into my proprietary program. The database populated, but there had to be a mistake. Heart pounding, I leaned closer to the screen. That's weird. What is? Julia hovered nearby, but kept a respectable distance, likely waiting for an invitation. This alert is telling me a plane took off, but I didn't get one when it landed. I motioned her closer. She didn't budge or speak or seem to breathe. Her reaction confused me, but I didn't have time to tease out what was going on in her head. Hell, at that point, it could have been any number of things. I'd botched 99% of our conversation since I'd returned from Leo's. I backed out of the program to run a diagnostic and pulled up my contacts list on my cell. I need to call Marco. Julia sank into the chair beside me, her gaze locked on the screen. Dante, we really need to talk. I'll make it quick. It wasn't until I pressed dial that I realized my hands were shaking. I wished I could have blown it off as Julia's nerves rubbing off on me, but I knew better. The people who'd ordered the hit on my brother had been in New Orleans for days without my knowledge. Dante, I was just about to call you about a fishing trip. Marco spoke over the sound of children's laughter and splashing. Nico, look! I needed his attention. To accomplish that, I needed him to walk away from the pool. This isn't a social call. We have a problem. You're not going to believe what Renata did. He chuckled, giving me absolutely no indication he'd heard me. The mention of my infant niece turned my blood to ice. We'd screwed up. We'd allowed ourselves to become vulnerable since leaving the Cosa Nostra. With wives and children in the mix, we never should have let our guard down. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. This is serious. Tommaso Abruzzo was in New Orleans. Julia drew a sharp breath. Odd, considering I doubted she knew who the guy was, let alone what he and his sisters were capable of. Are you sure? All traces of humor left Marco's voice. Keeping an eye on Julie, I said, not until I get the security footage from the commuter airport in Lakeshore, but it's definitely his plane. She glanced away. When did he come in? Any idea where he is now? Marco muttered a slew of curse words under his breath. I said the son of a bitch was in New Orleans. His plane took off a few minutes ago. I braced myself for his reaction. I'll need some time to figure out when he arrived. You didn't know he was here? The hell, Dante? I count on you to keep track of this shit. There's a bug in the program. I'll fix it. By bug, I meant the notification system I'd set up to track the identifier on certain aircrafts had failed, at least partially. I need to know when he came in, who he talked to, where he took a fucking piss. Capisci? Capisco. I didn't take his shouting personally. I'd be upset too if my wife and infant daughter were in danger because of a glitch. I'm digging into it. Do that. I'm going to notify my security team. I pressed enter and skimmed the data, but the woman beside me was making it difficult to concentrate. At some point during the conversation, she'd started to cry. Not wailing and sobbing and drama, silently. Had I not seen the tears on her cheeks, I would have missed it. Marco continued to rant but switched to Italian to speak to his bodyguards, which was a good thing because I wasn't processing anything he'd said. The phone and computer chirped in 3 quick beeps. Julia startled. I took her hand in mine and used the other to open the notification window. Abruzzo's plane had crossed the air defense identification zone along the U.S. border. Blowing out a sigh of relief, I said, Abruzzo's plane just cleared ADIZ. Good fucking riddance. Any idea if he was on it? Marco lowered his voice enough that people wouldn't hear him in the next parish. I can't access the airport security footage until it's archived, but I'll keep an eye out for it. I clicked another window to start the search process of the arrival information. Once I had the details of Abruzzo's visit to New Orleans, I intended to take my program apart bit by bit until I identified the cause of the failure. There goes the rest of my night and probably most of the day tomorrow. Marco said, Since Abruzzo is gone, I'm going to hold off on sounding the alarms to the family. Enzo just found out he's going to be a father. What? After the disaster with Leo, the news another niece or nephew was on the way knocked me for 6. Not to mention, neither Enzo nor Shauna seemed all that interested in having children. Is he happy about it? Thrilled, and so is she. They're planning to make the official announcement in Sicily over Christmas. Enzo has this idea to give the future grandparents baby gifts. Marco sighed as if just realizing how many Marchionni lives were at stake if he made the wrong call. And then there's Leo. Tell me about it, I muttered to myself. He's dealing with a situation with Dahlia that has the potential to blow sky high. Are you referring to the stalker or the kid? I added a long talk with Leo to my list of shit to do. You know about Gunnar? Marco didn't seem all that surprised. However, the fact he'd known shocked me. Not that long ago, he wouldn't have kept something so big from me. I figured it out when I met him. Am I the last to know? Don't be like that. You and I are the only ones. Marco sighed. Leo let it slip in the middle of lecturing me for marrying Nico. He was trying to prove how selfish I was, since he'd made some grand effing sacrifice. He's an idiot. An idiot who's freaked out that some psycho broke into his woman's house. He doesn't need this on top of it. He sounded as tired as I felt. I need to go. Get me the info, ASAP. Will do. I disconnected the call. Julia whispered, ADIZ? Air Defense Identification Zone. It's a boundary surrounding the United States. Pilots were required to file flight plans and notify the FAA before crossing it. It broke me to see her so upset, but I needed her to understand what this side of my job entailed. And if they don't? She wiped her tears away as if angry they'd crashed the party. If the pilot fails to notify the FAA on the way in, it's considered an act of aggression, and the military can get involved. I shrugged. I'm not sure what happens on the way out. She nodded, but I was pretty sure she'd checked out halfway through my explanation. Ignoring work for the time being, I spun my chair to face her. I'm sure you have questions about what I told you before and what just happened. Not really. Your program failed, someone dangerous was in the city without you knowing it, and your brother wants to know what the person did while he was here, right? That about sums it up. I squeezed her hand, partly to comfort her, but mostly because I needed to make sure she didn't bolt. What did you want to talk to me about earlier? I have no idea. She laughed a hollow sort of laugh that made my chest ache. Are you sure you're okay with all of this? Julia shrugged. Who was the man on the plane? I told her my family was involved with a freaking mob, and that's what she wants to know. His name is Tommaso Abruzzo. He's the head of one of the 5 mafia families in the Cosa Nostra. I hated to ask, but her reaction while I was on the phone with Marco seemed out there. Like in a galaxy far, far away out there. But you knew that already, didn't you? You realize I'm paid to hack into Marchionni computer systems? I'm privy to a lot of classified information. Her eye twitched and she bit her lower lip. I've seen the name on several security reports. I caught myself nodding, even though I was 99.9% sure she'd just lied to me. What I couldn't figure out was why or what she could possibly be up to. She'd worked for the company almost a year, and we hadn't faced any criminal charges, suffered any obvious corporate espionage, and had no known security breaches. What's going on with you, Julia Carpenter? She released my hand, stood, and rubbed her palms in the borrowed sweats. I should let you get to work. Sounds like you're going to have a long night." The logical half of my brain said she was right. She'd likely slow me down. However, the other half wasn't quite ready to let her out of my sight. "Stay. I could use your help debugging the program." "Are you sure?" She hesitated. "I mean, I'd love the distraction." "Same here. When I get in moods like that, work helps clear my head." Turning back to my monitor, I motioned to the spare computer beside mine. "Let's dig in. I'll pay you double time for the trouble." "You don't have to do that. Think of it as room and board." She hadn't sat, but she hadn't bailed either. I considered it a win, at least until I figured out what the hell she was keeping from me, and to do that, I needed to keep her close. "Text your friend about your bag. You can't go into work tomorrow in my sweats." She seemed flustered as she fumbled for her phone. "I don't know what's up with her. She's usually very dependable." I ran through our previous conversation while she tried to call her friend. Julia hadn't asked me anything about the mafia. In fact, I hadn't gotten around to explaining that. With the exception of Marco, my family was out of the Cosa Nostra. Despite what she'd said, I didn't buy that she knew so much because she monitored my family's security feed. If it's true, we seriously need to rethink our procedures. Julia set her cell on the desk. "Hopefully she'll call me back. If not, I'll send a courier to your place tonight." She tensed, likely to decline my offer, but sighed. "Thanks. Don't mention it. Let me know if you remember what you wanted to tell me earlier. It seemed important. Something about your family." "Dante?" Her soft tone surprised me. I turned my head at the exact moment she leaned in. Our eyes met for a microsecond before she closed the distance and pressed her soft lips to mine. I couldn't help but wonder if she was kissing me to cover her tracks, or if there was more to it. I told her I was falling for her before Marco called. That had to count for something, right? I couldn't bring myself to care, nor could I hold back any longer. Taking over the kiss, I tangled my fingers in her hair and pulled her closer. Julia replied with a quick breath and quicker moan. I felt the moment her center of gravity shifted. She stumbled and I tugged her into my lap. Julia pulled back enough for me to see the war raging behind her big brown eyes. One moment she smiled a real freaking smile that had me wondering why I ever doubted her. The next breath, she turned as if to pull away. Me? I waged my own internal war between letting her go and throwing her over my shoulder, carrying her to the gaming chair and tasting every square inch of her body. As much as I wanted her, I couldn't let things progress. Not while people I loved were in danger. And certainly not when I couldn't shake the feeling she'd kissed me to throw me off course. I eased her off my lap. "We should get to work." She flashed me a look that was somewhere between relieved and hurt. "Work. Right. Good idea."
Chapter 15. Frankie. Monday morning was hell, decorated with Christmas lights. The entire office glittered and gleamed with tinsel and trees and ornaments. Normally, I would have enjoyed the extravagant decor, but the blinking lights hurt my eyes. I'd stayed up until the wee hours of the morning helping Dante find the bug in his program, and desperately trying to ignore the urge to touch him. I might have locked lips with the guy, but that was more out of desperation than desire. Okay, maybe half desperation and half desire. Who am I kidding? I've been in love with him since before we met. Spending time with him only made those feelings stronger. Not that it mattered. Whatever silly fantasies I had about Dante accepting me once he learned I was an Abruzzo ended the second he'd realized my brother had visited New Orleans. Call it a curse or a blessing, but I thanked my lucky stars I'd overheard his half of the conversation with Marco. Good guy or not, Dante Marchionni loathed the Abruzzos. Myself included. Only he didn't know it yet. Adding another layer of suckage to my morning, I had to wear the same dirty clothes that I'd worn in on Saturday. Who knew couriers didn't work on Sunday evenings? In the grand scheme of things, my slightly smelly clothes weren't that big of a deal. The fact Iris hadn't come into work or called out sick was a big deal. A very big deal, as in the size of a small planet. Iris never missed work. and she had a slight compulsion about answering her phone and texts. Her radio silence scared me. I dialed her number for the 100th time and prayed she'd answer. But the call went straight to voicemail. Since I couldn't imagine why she'd be avoiding me, I assumed her phone had died. And of course, my sleep-deprived brain conjured up all sorts of horrid scenarios, all of which ended with Iris hurt, gravely ill, or worse. Focus, Frankie. Working on my 3rd cup of coffee, I logged into Dante's program and downloaded the latest security videos from the Lakeshore Airport. Call me crazy, but I wanted to see Tommaso getting on that plane for myself. While the file loaded, I called the lab and pressed 7 to speak to a representative. I couldn't understand the holdup. I'd sent them enough of Enzo's blood to run 1,000,000 tests. A pleasant female voice answered. New Orleans Diagnostic. I would like to check the status of my lab results. Of course. I need to ask you a few questions first. I went through the process of confirming my name, address, date of birth, test number, and password. Seriously, I'd opened credit cards with less information. She said, I show the report was mailed Wednesday of last week. I haven't received them. Is there any way you can tell me the results over the phone? I doubted it was legal, or ethical, or whatever, but it was worth a shot. Unfortunately, no. The sound of typing filled the silence. I'm afraid you'll need to wait for a duplicate report to be mailed, and have it get lost again? Every day of waiting for the United States Postal Service to come through was a day closer to Valentina's sham of a wedding. I couldn't wait. What if I come in person? We can print your results immediately. Be sure you bring 2 forms of identification, including one with a photo. Thank you. I'll stop by today or tomorrow. I disconnected and hunkered down to get some work done. The status bar on the file transfer had stalled at 12%. I canceled the download, backed out, and tried again. What else can go wrong today? Mia called. I should have known better than to tempt fate. Hello? Her voice filled the line the second I pressed answer. I understand you're leaving with Dante Marchionni. Hi, Mia. So good to hear from you bright and early on a Monday morning. If I had to guess, she'd waited until she knew I'd be at my desk to start a telephone version of the Spanish Inquisition. You didn't answer my question, she snapped. I didn't hear a question. Since you know where I slept last night, I assume you've spoken to Sophia? It was far too early for this conversation. Yes, she said you staying with Dante was her horrible idea. Honestly, Frankie, where's your head at these days? I thought you were the smart sister. Once I managed to switch my brain from English to Italian, I couldn't argue with her logic. I really should have known better than to listen to Sophia. You're right. It's a horrible idea. She tells me you have feelings for him. Mia made a tisking sound. I drew a deep, calming breath, but it did nothing to settle my temper. I did not appreciate her condescending tone or her butting into my personal life. Is there an actual reason for this call? Yes, as a matter of fact, there is. Tommaso is back in Sicily. It's safe for you to go home. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. While Mia was right, I couldn't help but wonder how she'd found out. Last night had been so busy, I'd forgotten to tell Sophia the news. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. I have a friend at the compound who keeps me abreast of the situation. Sophia had told me the same thing, but my gut instinct was to play dumb. That's helpful. How's Val holding up? Clean up your own mess before you worry about hers. Mia sounded more like our mother with each passing word. Not surprising. Both women were as warm as winter in the tundra. I made a non-committal sound and checked the status of the video download. I hated that she'd called my relationship with Dante a mess. Even if it was a disaster in the making, I'd enjoyed my time with him. working or playing video games or just hanging out. I'd never felt more like myself than when I was with Dante. Mia continued her lecture. It's time you quit your job and put some distance between you and the Marchionnis. You're risking too much for a relationship that can never happen. Thanks for the reminder. It dawned on me neither Mia nor Sophia had taken my feelings for Dante seriously. Or maybe they just didn't care. Either way, I'd had enough. My personal life is none of your business. As for my job, I'm not going to quit until I have what we need to take Tommaso down. Speaking of that, I could practically hear her narrowing her eyes. What is taking so long to get the lab results? In the past, her condescending words and curt tone would have stung more than bleach in a festering wound. But that day, they irritated me. I thought back to how Dante had dropped everything to help Leo get a tree. How upset he'd been when he'd learned his brother had kept secrets from him. How Dante's eyes lit when he talked about his family. Even when he was frustrated with his brothers, it was clear he loved them unconditionally. Mia doesn't care about me. She cares about what I can do for her. Are they all that selfish? Frankie, are you listening to me? I asked you a question. The results were lost in the mail. They're sending copies, but it will take a few days. Mia muttered something under her breath. Why aren't they posted on a website? Sophia insisted we needed a hard copy. Probably because of your incessant bragging that you can hack any computer system, she huffed. For the love of God, that doesn't even make sense. Her voice rose. You need to focus on saving Valentina instead of spending the weekend in Dante Marchioni's bed. Couch. I slept on the couch. I sent up a silent prayer for patience and opened the airport security footage. I could have hung up on her, but the more she talked, the more I understood about my place in the family and my current situation. Instead, I half-listened while I worked. Upset Mia was sloppy. She'd be far more likely to slip and tell me more about her confidant inside the Abruzzo compound. Mia laughed a bitter sort of laugh that had me grinding my teeth. You'd be in a better mood if you just sleep with the guy and get it over with. Wait, what? Not 5 minutes ago, you were preaching a different sermon. I hit fast forward on the security video to hurry things along. From the looks of it, I had 20 or so cameras to check, and there was no guarantee any of them had caught Tommaso's plane. Mia continued to ramble on about my prudish ways, using sex to get information out of Dante, and the likelihood I could get away with murder if I killed him in his sleep. I'd heard more than enough. There was absolutely no way I would allow her, or any of my family members, to use my relationship with Dante to hurt him or his family. It was past time I told him the truth, starting with how I felt about him and ending with my real name. If it's meant to be, it will be. If it's not, I'll deal with the consequences when he hands me over to Marco. Nice talking to you, Mia, but I'm working. Ciao. She started to say something, but I hung up. The surveillance video ended, and I opened the next in the queue. Images of a private jet sitting on a runway filled the screen. I'd have to do some serious enhancements on the grainy footage to make out any useful details. Frankly, I couldn't focus on anything except the conversation with my sister and figuring out what I planned to say to Dante. My coworker poked his head into my cube. Incoming. I rose just enough to peek over the partition. Leo Marchionni made eye contact, nodded, and strode in my direction. Shoot. I plopped down so fast I missed the chair and landed on the floor. I'd worked there for a year, and Leo had never once come to my cubicle. Come to think of it, none of the Marchionnis had given me a second look. I had no idea why he was there, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. A pair of expensive Italian leather shoes came into my line of vision, and I forced myself to look up. Frowning, Leo cocked his head. Everything okay? Yeah, I lost a contact. It just popped out of my eye. What am I saying? I patted the ground several times before adjusting my glasses and returning to my chair. You wear both? He motioned to the thick black frames that I considered part of my Julia Carpenter disguise. I replied with the first thing that came into my ridiculous brain. One is for distance and the other is for up close. What the heck does he want? Is this about Dante? He blinked several times before clearing his throat and turning his attention to my collection of Star Wars figurines. He seemed particularly interested in Princess Leia in the iconic gold bikini. Big surprise, considering his little brother was quasi-famous for wearing one just like it. Blood rushed behind my ears and the room tilted. The video of Dante at the convention showed my face. I'd never figured out why Tommaso would risk coming to New Orleans and leave before he took a shot at Marco, or any of the Marchionnis. But if he'd seen me with Dante... Leo stared, likely wondering why I was one stroke from hyperventilating. I need you to do some digging on someone. I want to know everything about him, including his whereabouts last night. If Tommaso was here for us, why did he leave empty-handed? I needed to talk to Sophia, but first I had to get rid of Leo. Julia? Sorry. I shook my head to clear my thoughts. I need a name. Date of birth or an approximate age would be helpful. Harrison Merriweather. Late 30s, maybe? The Harrison Merriweather? As in the state senator? I glanced over my shoulder. Why would he want to know the location of a prominent politician? Especially one who was close to the governor, who just happened to be running for president. Could this have something to do with Tommaso? Or was it about his girlfriend's stalker? My brain feels like it's on a tilt-a-whirl. Leo narrowed his eyes. He obviously didn't care for my reaction. I needed to say something and fast. He's unbelievably attractive, like the perfect specimen of maleness. I mean, he's not Marchionni hot, but yeah. He made a disgruntled sound and clasped his hands behind his back. See what you can dig up on the perfect specimen. I'll pay you overtime. I needed more to go on. Some clue as to why he was so interested. Is he in some sort of trouble? That's what I want you to find out. His tone could have sliced a man in half, and I had a strong feeling that's exactly what he wanted to do to the politician. I turned and typed the name into Dante's program. Not surprisingly, the information populated at light speed. Harrison Cooper Merriweather, 46. Parents are 46. Leo's voice rose. Are you sure that's the right guy? Motioning to a photo of Merriweather on the screen, I said, It's him, but I would have pegged him for 35 at the most. He must have some George Clooney or Keanu Reeves genes. He frowned. I'd like to know when he arrived in New Orleans, where he's staying. I'll check flight records. But he lives in Baton Rouge. Chances are he drove down. As I typed, I rattled off a quick list to make sure I was on the right track. Traffic cameras, license plate, hotel records. Perfect. I need the info as you gather it, Leo said. I gave him a quick nod without slowing my fingers and willed him to go away. The backlog on my desk would have to wait until I warned Sophia and figured out Leo's connection to Merriweather. And I would tell Dante the truth. Today.
Chapter 16. Dante. My weekend sucked, and my Monday was worse. After nearly 24 hours at my desk, debugging and testing and debugging some more, I still hadn't found the problem in my software. It didn't make sense that the only alert to fail was the one notifying me of the Abruzzo's arrival. The one bright spot in what was shaping up to be a spectacular mess was Julia. While she'd pretty much gone mute since overhearing my half of the conversation with Marco, she hadn't left. A win in my book. With so much going sideways in both of our lives, I liked knowing she was safe. Unlike the rest of us. I downed my second energy drink of the morning, shook out my arms, and queued up the security footage from the Lakeshore Airport. Whatever the hell was going on with my program would have to wait until I knew for sure Abruzzo had left the States. Once I got a visual on him, I'd work backward to the plane's arrival and track his activities while in New Orleans. After skimming a ridiculous amount of video, I found the private jet on a camera feed. From the looks of it, the plane was parked on an unpaved tertiary runway, which made sense if they didn't want to draw attention to what they were loading or unloading from the aircraft. I set the speed to triple time and waited for something to happen. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I forced myself to focus on the monitor. A dark sedan parked on the runway. I slowed the feed and zoomed in on the car. The images were as grainy as the Bigfoot videos on the conspiracy theory websites, but there was no mistaking the man exiting the back seat. Tommaso Abruzzo. I'd know his lanky body and slouched shoulders anywhere. As kids, my brothers and I had nicknamed him Lurch, as in the creepy guy from the Addams Family. Rather than stalking directly to the plane, Tommaso reached into the car and pulled a woman to her feet. She was tall, the top of her head coming to his chin. I couldn't be sure, but between her height and her long dark hair, she looked a hell of a lot like Sofia Abruzzo, a.k.a. the woman who'd killed my brother. Who else could it be? It's her. I fucking know it. My grip tightened on the mouse and my eyes narrowed. I struggled to breathe as if my anger had burned the oxygen away like a raging fire. How long has she been in New Orleans? Right under our fucking noses. I dialed Marco's number. Pronto, Dante. That he'd answer the phone in Italian pissed me the hell off. I wanted my brother back, not the freaking godfather. I'm looking at the footage of Abruzzo leaving Mississippi. He has a woman who looks a lot like Sofia with him. I need to know if it's her. He spoke in a quiet tone, but his voice could have sliced through cast iron. The tighter I zoomed in, the more the video pixelated, but there was no mistaking the scene playing out on the screen. She managed to land a roundhouse kick to his crotch before headbutting him in the face, with her hands tied. Damn. Marco went quiet for several seconds. We need to talk. Where are you? In the back cave. My stomach nodded. I didn't want to ask, but I had to know. What's this about? Your girl. The way he'd gone squirrely when he'd seen Julia on the viral video. Her reaction to our conversation about Abruzzo. Her lack of reaction about the mafia. It all came together in one nice, neat package. She has something to do with this. What do you know? Marco sighed. I'll be there within the hour. Tell me now, damn it. She's living in my apartment for fuck's sake. I think she's Francesca Abruzzo, Tommaso's youngest sister. I laughed because the alternative would leave me under my desk in the fetal position. Bullshit. Julia is as American as they come. You and I both know it's next to impossible to lose the Italian accent. She was sent to boarding school in Connecticut when she was young. Adrenaline flooded my system along with the urge to punch something. That lying, scheming. Every good lie starts with a kernel of truth. Julia had told me she'd been born and raised in Connecticut. Hell, she'd told me she'd attended a boarding school near Hartford. I rested my head in my hands. I'll deal with her. No, you won't. She's the daughter of a former capo and sister of his successor. There are rules about how these things are handled. Marco used his big bag crime boss voice, but I wasn't impressed. I need to be there when you talk to her. The same rules that allowed Sofia to get away with cold-blooded murder? My laughter sounded maniacal even to my own ears. I'll bring her to you when I'm finished with her. This time when he spoke, he sounded more like my brother and less like a capo. Are you in love with this girl? I hesitated to answer, but I couldn't deny how I felt about her. He'd see right through my lie. Yes, but that doesn't mean... It means you're not thinking straight. Sooner or later, your anger is going to change to pain. The last thing you need is to add regret to the mix. He drew a deep breath. Find out what she's been up to and why before you crucify her. I knew he was right, but I wasn't ready to deal in logic. The first woman I'd fallen for had, what? Pretended to care about me to get to my family? Set us up for God knows what? Manipulated her way into my freaking apartment? And heart? Screw that. I'm not going to regret a damned thing. Calm down. Do some deep breathing or something, and for Christ's sake, wait until I get there to confront her, Marco said. This is personal. Between me and her, I need to talk to her alone. I'm not going to lay a finger on her and break any mob rules. I swear it. Promise me she won't leave the building. Leave the building? There was no ex-boyfriend. It was Tommaso freaking Abruzzo. She was afraid because her brother was in New Orleans. But why had she stayed after she knew he'd left the States? What was her game? The more I thought about the situation, the more questions came up. If I had any hope of getting straight answers, I needed to talk to Julia. No, Francesca, alone. Done. Don't make me regret this. You have my word. I disconnected and pulled up Miss Carpenter's employee file. Other than a fake name, address references, and a falsified background check, everything appeared to be in order. Julia Francesca, whatever the hell her name was, had done a damn good job of creating an alias. I opened a log of her PC activities and found the answers. Not easy ones to swallow, but answers nonetheless. Data didn't lie, and the data on my screen painted a rather damning picture. She'd accessed everything from my private software to my family's personal financials to dossiers on our legal business associates and other crime families. Was she looking for something specific or feeding information to her brother? I struggled to reconcile Francesca Abruzzo, mob princess, with Julia Carpenter, the woman I'd fallen in love with. They might as well have been two separate people. What am I missing? After 2 hours of digging into every possible angle as to her motives, I gave up and called her office line. Julia Carpenter. She seemed distracted or guilty, or both, but her voice cut straight through me. Marco was right. I'm not thinking straight. It's Dante. I need you to come upstairs. I found a glitch I can't solve. I'm really swamped. Can it wait until later? The clickety-clack of her fingers on the keyboard pissed me off. I logged into her PC to see what had her so distracted. Why is she looking into Harrison Merriweather? What the hell else is she up to? It can't wait. Be here in 5. To make sure she did as I'd asked, I remotely locked her computer and disabled her security clearance. Childish? Maybe. But Miss Carpenter and I had a lot to discuss. She gasped. Crap, I got a blue screen of death. That's the glitch. I disconnected the call and walked to the living room to wait. 5 minutes later, Julia walked through my front door in her baggy sweater and glasses. Her hair was an absolute disaster, piled on the top of her head and held in place with a scrunchie. Her normally rosy complexion had dulled and shadows circled her eyes, and yet she was still the most beautiful woman on the planet. I found myself in an epic battle between my brain and my heart. Logically, I wanted to lay into her, to demand the truth and turn her over to Marco. Emotionally, I was bruised and angry and wanted to beg her to tell me none of it was true. Standing in front of me, it was hard to believe she was some sort of mafia operative. She seemed so frightened or sick or stressed. I desperately wanted to believe I was wrong about her. You still haven't gotten your things from your place? I had no idea why I had asked such a stupid question, other than I needed to buy myself time to figure out how to confront her. Julia met my gaze for a nanosecond before glancing around the room, seemingly anywhere except me. Iris didn't come into work, and she's not returning my calls. I'm really worried about her. I bit back a smart-ass comment about fake addresses and lying to friends. I'll have someone from HR call her. Before we get to work, there's something I need to tell you. Her voice thinned halfway through the sentence. Whatever she had to tell me had her on edge. More on edge than a missing best friend. Have a seat. I motioned to the couch, but sat in the adjacent chair to keep some distance between us. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other and folded her arms. I think I need to stand. Suit yourself. This isn't how I imagined this would go, but here it is. She paused, drew a breath, and blew me away. I'm in love with you. The battle waging inside of me ended with a nuclear freaking explosion. I'm talking full-on mushroom cloud, mass death, and complete destruction. I'd wanted to hear those words from her for months, but I didn't trust them. I didn't trust her. She held up her hands. Don't say it back. Not until you hear what else I have to say. I need you to let me finish before you respond, okay? The tears forming in her eyes about did me in, but I nodded. My name is Francesca Abruzzo. She looked everywhere except at me. I lied to get a job here because I was trying to find information I could use to blackmail your family. And there it is. I planted my elbows on my knees and hung my head. I know. She went stone still. You know? I suspected something was up, but Marco confirmed it. Marco knows? She gripped the back of the chair as if to keep her balance. I couldn't look at her. Not one part of me wanted to hate her and the other wanted to hold her. He'll be here soon. I suggest you start explaining. She sank into a chair. I'm not proud of what I've done, but my sisters and I are desperate. One of her sisters had killed my brother and tried to take out my entire family at Gabe's engagement party. I get around to telling her Tommaso had Sophia eventually, but I couldn't bring myself to care about her freak show of a family. My brother, Tommaso, is marrying you off one at a time to build his base of power. I know. What I don't know is what you hope to gain by spying on my family. Julia Francesca nodded without looking me in the eye. At first, no one believed the Marchionnis were out of the Cosa Nostra. And you thought you could blackmail us into what? Protecting you and your sisters? I couldn't wrap my brain around it. She'd been working for us for a year. Could it really have been about her sisters all of that time? Marco has power, and Nico is a Lazio. She could have spoken to her brother. She stiffened her spine as if preparing for a fight. 2 votes out of 5 wouldn't have made a difference in the Fratellanza. I tried to imagine what I would have done if our roles were reversed. Would I have had the balls to infiltrate the Abruzzo's businesses in hopes of blackmailing them to save my brothers? Maybe. Maybe not. We thought Marco would make it happen. With the right motivation. Her voice cracked. Like proving the rest of us were still in the business? And when you didn't find anything, then what? She shook her head. We? Who's we? Sophia and I. Bile rose in my throat. I knew it. I freaking knew she would say Sophia. Something inside me snapped, and I was on my feet with my hands wrapped around her upper arms before I'd realized I'd stood. You will not as much as say her name around me. Do I make myself clear?
Chapter 17. Frankie. You're hurting me! I fought the urge to use my martial arts training to break free of Dante's grip. I don't know how I'd expected him to react, but I never thought he'd resort to violence. Dante stared down at his hands, as if surprised to find them crushing my arms. He blinked twice, released me, and turned away. I apologize. As angry as I am, I'd never hurt you. Rubbing my biceps, I nodded. Sophia is responsible for my brother and his wife's death. He stared as if daring me to contradict him. I hoped there would come a time that I could set the record straight. But he'd had enough truth for one day. I'd tell him he had the wrong Abruzzo once he'd calmed down. Where are your other sisters? He spoke without turning, as if he couldn't stand the sight of me. In hiding in Sicily. I've tried to get them out, but it's too dangerous. Now Tommaso has Valentina and is forcing her to marry Michele Salvo. Something flashed across his expression at the mention of the mobster's name. Anger? Hatred? Maybe both, seasoned with fear. Salvo is a sick bastard. But that doesn't explain why you've been lying to me and my family for almost a year. It absolutely does. Tommaso started arranging our marriages before my father's body was cold. I wiped my eyes, hating the tears almost as much as I hated the steel in Dante's expression. He sat on the couch, stretched his long legs, and motioned in my general direction. Save the dramatics. My mother was a mafia princess. I know your type can cry on demand. Is he serious? I'd hurt him. I got it. But that didn't give him the right to outright insult me. My type? Lying, manipulative. He barked out a humorless laugh. Do you really need me to explain? Yes, I'd lied. And yes, I'd manipulated him. But I hadn't gone out of my way to hurt him. And yet, that's exactly what I'd done. I'm sorry. I should have told you the truth the minute I saw you without your Joker makeup." He flinched as if I'd struck him. Mentioning the old us, Danny and Julia, seemed to break through his newly formed crunchy shell and reach the man inside. I lowered my voice. "I didn't know it was you online." "That I believe." And just like that, the shell returned, harder than ever. "Everything I've told you since I walked through that door is the truth, even though it's putting my life in danger." He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "What about the stuff you told me online? Was that real, or part of the act?" "The names were different, and I was born in Sicily, not Connecticut. Everything else was true." I struggled to get the words out. "Why are you telling me all of this now?" His smirk hurt almost as much as his insults. "Because I fell in love with you and couldn't stand the lies." I couldn't hold back my emotions much longer, and I'd be damned if I broke down in front of him. Not after he'd accused me of faking tears. Dante stared as if he couldn't quite figure me out, which was probably true. "Why were you investigating Harrison Merriweather?" "Leo asked me to." He nodded and pushed to his feet. "Right. The woman he's been hung up on for years was dating Merriweather. Did you find anything?" "Not yet, but I've been distracted." Dante narrowed his eyes. "I bet." I had no idea what to say to him and doubted anything would help. "I need a drink." He strode to the kitchen, poured himself a shot, and downed it before pouring another. "Want one?" "No thanks." Taking advantage of his momentary distraction, I checked my phone. No word from Sophia or Iris. Where the hell are they? Expecting a call? His expression turned cold enough to freeze hell. I wanted nothing more than to tell him the truth. To tell him I was worried about Sophia. But he'd made it abundantly clear how he felt about her. "I still haven't heard from Iris." "Iris or Sophia?" He folded his arms. "Does it matter?" I stood. "Do you really need my help with the glitch, or can I get back to work?" His eyes widened for a millisecond, then narrowed again. "Last night, the failed alert. There was never a bug, was there? It was you." My throat tightened. Was he accusing me of sabotaging his program? Raking his hands through his hair, Dante laughed the same bitter laugh as before. "How the fuck did I miss it? You intercepted the alert when your brother's plane landed." "I didn't, I swear." Shaking my head, I said, I saw it, but I didn't delete it." "You seemed so scared. But there was never a stalker. It was a setup." His expression turned murderous. "And I fell for it. I invited you into my apartment and gave you access to everything." "I did manipulate you into inviting me to stay here." I backed away from him. "Because I was terrified to leave the building." My hands trembled, and the shaking moved up my arms and spread through my entire body. I could see why he'd think those things, but I didn't know how to make it right. I couldn't change what I'd done, and it was killing me. Killing me to see him in pain and knowing I'd caused it. "I have to go." I turned for the door. Dante moved quicker than I would have thought possible to block my exit. "You aren't going anywhere, sweetheart. Not until you speak to Marco." "You can't keep me prisoner here with you." I knew I'd taken a risk telling Dante the truth, but I honestly didn't think he'd hand me over to his brother. What would Marco do to me? Send me to Sicily? Deliver me to Tommaso wrapped in a big fat bow? "You don't have to worry about that. I won't be here." Dante pulled his phone from his pocket and pointed to the chair. "Sit down." Panic thinned my voice. "Please, Dante, just let me go. I swear, you'll never have to see me again. I can't go back to Sicily." Ignoring me, he held his phone to his ear. "Kincaid, I need around-the-clock guards on my place. My guest is not to leave." My pulse thumped in my ears, and I broke out in a cold sweat. In what I could only describe as insane desperation, I bolted for the door. Dante dropped the phone and caught me around the waist. Holding my back against his chest, he said, "No one's sending you back to Sicily." "You don't know that. You don't know what Marco is going to do." I sounded like a lunatic. But I couldn't help it. Everything I cared about was crumbling around me, and there wasn't a damned thing I could do about it. Worse still, I deserved it. Sure, I had my reasons for doing what I'd done, but it was all for nothing. A year's worth of work, struggling to stay afloat, lies on top of lies down the tubes. I'd failed. Valentina was engaged to a monster. Sophia and Iris were missing in action. The man I loved couldn't stand the sight of me. I went limp in his arms, too ashamed to continue to fight and too afraid to cry. Dante turned me to face him, lifted my chin, and met my gaze. "I told you. I'd never hurt you." I believed he believed what he'd said, but life had taught me even the best of intentions could end in disaster. "I'm sorry for everything. I meant it before, when I said I loved you. I never meant to hurt you." He closed his eyes. "I loved you too. But I'm going to walk away. I need time to think and figure things out before I say more stupid shit I'll live to regret." My heart quivered as if it couldn't take one more blow. Dante studied my face. "Do I call you Francesca now?" "Please, no. It's Frankie." "I like that. It suits you." A hint of a smile ghosted his lips. "For the record, I wasn't entirely honest before. It's love, not loved. It's just complicated." Staring into his eyes, I could almost believe everything would work out. Almost. A knock at the door startled me back to reality. Dante jumped back and gave me a confused look that told me the tender moment had surprised him as much as it had me. Rather than standing there or following him like a lost puppy, I sat on the lumpy sofa and checked my phone. Nothing. Dante opened the door and spoke to Kincaid. "Thanks for coming. Miss Carpenter will be staying here for the foreseeable future. See to it that she has whatever she needs, but she's not to leave the apartment under any circumstances." "Yes, sir." "I'll be staying elsewhere. Call me if there is any trouble." He glanced over his shoulder. "But there won't be, right?" "Right. Not from me, anyway. We'll see what happens when Marco arrives." I remained silent as Dante shut the door and strode down the hall. Judging by the sounds of drawers opening and closing in the back of the apartment, I guessed he was packing. A million questions danced through my mind, but I didn't think it wise to ask where he planned to go, when he'd be back, if I'd hear from him again. He returned with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "I revoked your security clearance, but I'll reinstate limited access so you can keep digging into Hearst and Merriweather. Use the spare PC in my office." "Thanks. It means a lot you trust me to keep working." "I don't. Leo needs the information, and you need something to occupy your time." His expression softened for a split second before it went blank again, like he struggled to hang on to his anger. "Someone will be monitoring your online activity. Don't do anything stupid." I nodded. Dante held out his hand. "Give me your phone." My cell was my lifeline. Without it, my sisters and Iris had no way to reach me. One glance at his determined expression, and I knew there was no sense in arguing. Instead, I handed it over. "Use the internet phone if you need to make a call, but know it will be monitored." He slid my last bit of freedom into his back pocket and headed for the door. "Give Kincaid your real address. He'll arrange for your bag to be delivered." I scrambled to my feet. "Dante, wait!" He stopped but kept his back to me. "Promise me you'll answer my phone if it rings. It's the only way my sisters and Iris can reach me. I need to know they're all right. Turning, he opened his mouth as if to speak, but clamped it shut, nodded, and walked out. The sound of the door closing behind him hit me like a gunshot to the chest.
Chapter 18. Dante. Leaving Frankie in my apartment was the right thing to do, but it had taken every ounce of my willpower to walk out the door. I needed time to go through her data files and make sure I hadn't missed anything important. Time to think, to lick my wounds, to decide my next move. However, before I could do any of that, I needed to have a chat with Marco. I parked my ass at the reception desk to wait and fell down the rabbit hole of what-ifs. What if we start over? What if I forgive her? Can I do that? What if I don't? Can I let her go? I wanted to tell myself everything would work out. That as long as she was telling the whole truth and nothing but, she hadn't caused any real harm. That she'd gained access to a hell of a lot of information, some of which could get her killed. But as long as she kept it to herself, there was no real threat. That even with everything that had happened, we'd end up together. But I knew better. Even if I could forgive and forget, my family would never accept her. Not to mention, a Marchionni Abruzzo union would put Marco in an impossible spot with the Cosa Nostra. Mafia marriages required as much negotiations as royal matches. There were terms to iron out, alliances to forge, enemies to appease. Not that I'm thinking marriage. Late as usual, Marco came through the glass doors with his security team following a few steps behind him. He caught sight of me and arched a brow. I take it things didn't go well. What makes you say that? I gave him a half-hearted hug. He continued to stare like he expected me to have a meltdown in the middle of the lobby. Not for nothing, but you look like someone pissed in your Cheerios, dude. I'll tell you all about my urine-soaked cereal in there. I nodded to a set of double doors to our right. He followed me to the empty conference room. Where's the girl? I left her in my apartment. Kincaid has orders to keep her there. Nothing would have made me happier than walking out of the building and forgetting about my mess of a life for a few hours, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not when I had questions that needed answering. Is that wise, with all of your equipment up there? No, but I intend to put a monitor on her account. She won't as much as watch a video on YouTube without my knowing about it. I hitched a shoulder. Besides, she's doing some digging into Meriwether for Leo. Marco plopped into a chair, rested his elbow on the armrest, and propped his chin in his hand. Grinning, he asked, Frankie Abruzzo, huh? I wouldn't have given her the time of day had I known who she was. I more slumped than sat. But yeah, looks like we both have a thing for mafia princesses. Did she give you an explanation for her activities over the previous year? Trying to get the goods on us so she could force you into helping her sisters. Rather than meeting his gaze, I picked at my cuticles. I didn't tell her Tommaso has Sophia. Marco sat back and blew out a breath. Don't you think she needs to know? Yes and no. I'd almost told her before I left the apartment, but had stopped myself. She has a right to know because Sophia's her sister. No, because she'll do something stupid and end up in the same situation or worse. Good point. Marco scratched his jaw. Has she been up to anything else besides snooping around here? That bug in my program? I hesitated, trying to figure out what I thought about her involvement before blabbing to Marco. She may have caused it, but I'm going to stop you right there. He held up his hand as if to illustrate his point. Given what's going on with Sophia and Valentina, I seriously doubt she hosed your program to cover for Tommaso. Shaking my head, I mumbled, Me either, but she intercepted the alert. That's disturbing. He furrowed his brow. So which is it? Is she helping that asset or trying to save her sisters? The latter. On some levels, I wondered if I knew Frankie Abruzzo at all, but on others, I felt like I'd known her my entire life. Then again, she could be one hell of a con artist, which would make me one hell of a sap. But I have no proof. What does your gut say? My gut doesn't get a vote. I want cold, hard facts. He nodded. You okay with me talking to her? Absolutely. Maybe your bullshit meter is working better than mine. I'd like your take on the situation. My phone rang before Marco had a chance to reply. It's Kincaid. I brought the phone to my ear. Marchionni? Sir, there's a situation at Miss Carpenter's house. He spoke in his usual clipped tone, but beneath the professional veneer he seemed shaken. A shooting. Frankie had told me she lived with her sister in a place on the seedier side of town. I'd assumed the sister in question was Sophia, but I'd seen her boarding a plane. So who was left in the house? Kincaid, I'm putting you on speaker. Marco is here with me. Of course. I hit the button and asked, what the hell happened? Who was shot? His voice filled the room. The man I sent to retrieve Miss Carpenter's things was hit in the shoulder upon entering the premises. He returned fire and hit the shooter. Non-life-threatening injuries. Marco stood and paced. Any idea what the shooter was doing inside the house? Did your guy interrupt a burglary? There's a female on site. She claims she works for Marchionni Corp., an Iris Rogers. She's been held against her will, Kincaid said. I haven't shared this information with Miss Carpenter. My chest tightened. Frankie had mentioned she was worried about Iris several times, but I'd been too upset to stop and think the other woman could be in danger. Has anyone called the authorities? Kincaid cleared his throat. No, sir. I have a team headed there now. The shooter is Italian and doesn't appear to speak English. Son of a bitch. Text me the address. We're on the way. Marco turned for the door. Don't mention any of this to my house guest. Disconnecting the call, I followed my brother. Interrogating Frankie would have to wait. How much of a shitstorm is this going to cause for you? He hitched a shoulder. Depends. Holy non-answer, Batman. We exited the Marchionni Corporation building and loaded into an SUV with 2 members of Marco's security team. The remaining 2 members followed in a second vehicle. I turned to my brother. They have Frankie's friend. Aren't there rules about this kind of thing? About how women are treated? Staring out the window, he said, wives, daughters, sisters, grandmothers, yes. Bystanders, no. But Tommaso took Sophia against her will and would have done the same to Frankie had she gone home. His expression reminded me of our mother, forced patience with a side order of, are you stupid? Female family members are property to the Cosa Nostra. When her father died, Tommaso inherited the right to do as he pleases, as long as she's not seriously injured or killed. Mob logic had never made much sense to me, but I chalked it up to a bunch of old men following old rules. However, I drew the line at treating women like baseball cards. Shaking my head, I turned my attention to the passing scenery. In the months that I'd spent unknowingly talking to Frankie Abruzzo, she'd painted a vivid picture of her current living situation. She told me about the lack of air conditioning and how they didn't dare sleep with their windows open. She told me how she hated to work late because the bus stop was a few blocks from her house and walking home at night freaked her out. She told me stories about her neighbors that had me begging to help her find another place to live. Nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the reality. Over 15 years had passed since Hurricane Katrina and the subsequent floods had devastated New Orleans. While the parts of the city I frequented had rebuilt and moved on, the neighborhood Frankie called home seemed stuck in time. Telltale spray-painted X's remained on far too many houses, a grim reminder of the people who'd lost their lives in the storm. Several vacant lots dotted the street, and others were littered with the remains of homes, garbage, and God knew what else. It reminded me of a war zone. The SUV came to a stop in front of a tiny shotgun house. The entire structure leaned as if still fighting the hurricane winds. My first reaction was denial. There was no way the woman I loved, yes, I still loved her, lived in that wretched place. But the man wearing a Marchionni Corp security shirt out front popped my wishful thinking bubble. Marco reached for the handle, but I stopped him. Wait, what's the plan? I'd never considered myself a coward, but then again, I'd never had to deal with this side of the mafia. I'd handled the techie stuff. Guns and blood and retribution were someone else's problem. He gave me a look that told me he regretted not sending me upstairs to wait with Frankie. We question him, get the girl out of there, and call the cops. Gotcha. Rather than wuss out, or worse, trail him like a baby duck, I opened my door and strode to the house. Watch your step. The guard on the porch nodded to a section of rotted wood. Shame filled me. I'd lived and worked in opulence while people in my community suffered, while Frankie had suffered. Thankfully, inside the house wasn't as bad as the outside. Other than the 2 bleeding men, piles of takeout containers, and the stench of body odor, rotted food, and urine, the entire space would have fit into my parents' living room, but the walls had a fresh coat of sunny yellow paint. Bright white curtains hung over gleaming windows, and neat stacks of dishes sat on open shelves in the kitchen. The place had probably felt homey before the unwanted visitors. Iris glanced up from the tiny kitchen table, burst into tears, and launched herself into my arms. Not that I minded, but I'd only seen her around the office, and I couldn't remember if we'd ever spoken. Once again, my shame became a living, breathing thing. It struck me that I should know the people who work for my family. I should know what they did for us, their stories, their freaking names. Afraid to squeeze her too tight and hurt her, but at the same time wanting to reassure her, and maybe myself, I held her. It's okay. You're safe. Is Julia, okay? Iris seemed to realize she'd hugged the boss and jumped back. Then again, her reaction could have had a little something to do with dropping the wrong name. She's at my place. I couldn't help but wonder if she'd learned Frankie's real name from her captors, or if she'd known far longer. That's good, she whispered. I don't know who these people are, but I think they would have killed her if they'd found her. Marco entered the already crowded room. In one quick sweep, he seemed to take in the details of the scene. Medics patching up the injured bodyguard, the barely conscious bleeding Italian. Scared but safe woman. He turned to Iris. Are you hurt? No. I wasn't convinced. Even though I couldn't see any bruises, didn't mean they weren't there. Tell me what happened. His harsh tone surprised me. Iris had been through enough without him barking orders at her. I opened my mouth to tell him to lay off, but bit my tongue when she stiffened her spine and raised her chin. Iris wiped the back of her hand across her nose. There were 3 of them in the house when I came to get Julia's bag. Only one spoke English. He demanded I tell him where Frankie was hiding. At first, I didn't know who he was talking about. Marco nodded. How long ago did the others leave? Yesterday afternoon. Did they say where they were going or mention any names? Any details, even small ones, might help me find them. Iris sighed. Like I said, they mostly spoke Italian. Marco gave her a once-over. Are you sure you're not hurt? I can arrange for a doctor to make a house call, if you'd rather not go to the emergency room. I'll be fine once I'm out of here. Her eyes widened, and she swallowed hard. Do you know these men? Do you know where the rest of them went? I live alone. What if... I'd seen Frankie have the same reaction when discussing Tommaso. Iris, you're welcome to stay at my place with Frankie. There's security on the building 24/7. Thanks. I'd like that. She crumbled in on herself. Marco met my gaze and nodded to the door before turning to the Italian currently bleeding on Frankie's floor. Message received. Let's go wait in the car. We'll go as soon as the police say it's okay. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and guided her to the SUV. I only hoped the vehicle was soundproof enough to block out whatever Marco had in mind for Abruzzo's henchmen.
Chapter 19. Frankie. The clock on Dante's nightstand read 2 a.m, but I didn't stand a chance of falling back asleep. In the 3 days since Dante had dropped Iris off at the apartment, she'd showed no signs of wanting to go home. Not that I blamed her after what my brother's men had put her through. Although we'd both managed to get a little work done, we'd spent just as much time talking. Her telling me what she'd endured, questions, threats, demands, and me apologizing for sending her there, lying to her, and answering a million questions about the Cosa Nostra and my relationship with Dante. Iris cried out in her sleep. Again. I rested my hand on her shoulder and whispered, It's okay. You're safe. Every night was the same. We'd call it a day and crawl into Dante's massive bed. Iris would toss and turn until she finally fell asleep, and then she'd alternate between snoring or suffering nightmares until dawn. Me? I developed insomnia. Iris rolled over and sighed. Sorry, I'm keeping you up. Did I have another nightmare? No, I was just thinking about my sisters. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and turned to face her. Sophia promised me we'd spend Christmas together, but I have a sick feeling Tommaso has her. Maybe she's hiding out somewhere. Maybe. I'd feel better if I could reach Mia. She has an informant at my brother's house. If Sophia's there, the servant would know." Iris perked up.
"Your sister has a spy on the inside? A maid or something?"
Mia never told me the person's name, but yes. Her question didn't surprise me. Iris had asked 1,000,000 or so since Dante had dropped her off. Yes, the mafia is a lot like in the movies. No, I've never killed someone or seen anyone killed. Yes, my family is filthy rich. Yes, I miss the money, but no, I'm never going back to Sicily.
"The man who held me hostage. Do you know what happened to him?"
Iris's voice shook with what I assumed was fear. But something about the way she stared felt off. "No." I forced a smile, but she knew me well enough to see through it. "But you don't need to worry about him. Marco will see that justice is done." She blinked several times as if holding back tears.
"That's just it. He didn't hurt me. He could have, but he was kind to me after the others left. We talked, about our lives."
I'd heard of captives developing feelings for their captors, but something about Iris's reaction set me on edge. "I thought you said he didn't speak English."
"I, speak a little Spanish, and so does he."
She let out a nervous laugh.
"Have you heard from Dante?"
My stomach clenched every time I heard his name. He's called or texted to check in about work stuff.
"Don't worry, Frankie. You two will work it out."
She yawned and closed her eyes. "Good night, Iris."
"Good night."
While I appreciated her optimism, I didn't share it. No matter how much I wanted him, I knew better than to believe we had a future. Hope was a double-edged sword. It allowed me to imagine what could be while setting me up for disappointment. Dante and me ending up together was a daydream that could never and would never come true. I gave up on sleep and wandered into the Batcave to check the security video from the Lakeshore Airport. For some unknown reason, they hadn't uploaded the footage from the night my brother's plane had left Mississippi. After logging into the network, I scrolled through the messages and emails on my cell. Although I hadn't heard a peep from any of my sisters, I was thankful Dante had given my phone back the night he'd brought Iris to the apartment. Evidently, my brother's men holding my bestie hostage had proven I wasn't an Abruzzo spy. Although technically, that's exactly what I am. Only I don't work for Tommaso. An instant message popped up on the computer screen, and my stupid heart leapt into a gallop. Dante. You're up late. Me. Couldn't sleep. Dante. Iris still having nightmares? Me. Yep. Dante. Sorry to hear that. Me. I hate this for her. Dante. It kills me to think of you in my bed while I'm not there. Fingers hovering over the keyboard, I read and reread his last message. It was definitely flirty, but he'd been fairly standoffish since I'd told him my real name. What changed? Should I flirt back? What do I have to lose? Only everything. Me. The sheets smell like you, Dante. There are clean ones in the closet. Unless you like the way I smell. I hesitated to tell him the truth. He'd given me more than a place to stay. He'd made sure Iris and I were safe, fed, and had everything we needed, including a never-ending supply of chocolate, wine, and gelato. Correction. Dante had given me everything I needed except him. Me. You don't exactly stink, Dante. I did today. Sweat, fish, and beer. LOL. Me. Fishing trip with your brothers? Dante. Yep. Had a blast. I'll tell you all about it later. Me. Can't wait. How was Leo after my text? I dug up a fair amount of dirt on Harrison Merriweather. The popular politician was an absolute sleazeball. I hadn't found proof he was Leo's girlfriend's stalker, but it was only a matter of time. Merriweather had a long history of abusing women, including his ex-wife. Dante. Upset, but glad he asked you to look into it. Good work?
Me. Thank you.
Dante. About these sheets that don't exactly stink, do they make you think about me?
Me. It's not just the sheets. I'm surrounded by your things 24/7. I've been sleeping in your t-shirts.
Dante. Lucky shirts. I'd give anything to be wrapped around you. I can't get you off my mind. My dumb heart swooned like the heroine in some old romance novel.
But warning bells went off in my brain. This was too easy, too fun, too dangerous until we had a serious conversation. Me. I'm glad you texted, but I'm confused. Where is all of this coming from? My phone rang and startled me out of my Dante-induced stupor.
That is, until I saw his name on the screen.
Hi.
My voice came out girly and breathy.
Hi.
He cleared his throat. So, this is easier via text, but too important to screw up.
My chest tightened, and a tiny ember of hope burned deep in the remains of my heart. You sound nervous.
I am.
Dante made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Tell me what you're thankful for. He hesitated for the longest 5 seconds of my life.
I'm thankful you and Iris are safe, but I'd like to banish how much I miss you.
I miss you too.
To answer your question, I've been thinking about what happened to Iris, and what could have happened to you if you'd gone home.
Me too. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say to him 1,000,000 times since he'd left, but couldn't get the words out.
I get it. You weren't trying to hurt my family. You were trying to help your sisters?
The lift in his voice made this statement sound like a question. I was, and I'm sorry. For everything.
I can't make you any promises about the future, but I can't stop thinking about you.
He went quiet, and I panicked, thinking he was about to hang up. What sorts of things are you thinking? I was playing with explosives, but I wasn't ready to let him go.
Kissing you?
What else?
His voice deepened. You in that metal bikini. Model it for me one day.
Only if you model your Leia outfit for me.
I held my breath, waiting for his next words. Way to go, Frankie, bringing up that nightmare of a day. Where are you?
My heart beat so fast I thought I'd faint. In your bat cave?
Are you wearing my shirt?
Come home and find out. I slapped my hand over my mouth to keep from saying more. Oh, crap. What did I just do?
He'll never go for it.
I knew our friendship was risky, and anything more would end in heartache. I knew I should put an end to our flirting, but deep in my soul, I wanted him. Even if it was a temporary fling, I wanted whatever he had to offer.
Will Iris be upset if she wakes up and you're not there?
Not if I leave a note, but I'm confused. Where are you? Between my racing pulse and the thought of touching him again, I felt like I'd spontaneously combust.
The penthouse apartment,
he mumbled as if embarrassed or afraid of how I'd respond.
I wanted to stay close, in case something happened or you needed me.
I lowered my voice to a purr. I do need you. Dante made a sound somewhere between a groan and a growl.
Do you now?
I need us together with nothing in the way. No computer, or walls, or clothes.
Give me 5 to let security know and get your sweet ass up here.
What am I doing? This is a bad idea. A very, very bad idea. Can't wait. I hung up before I could talk myself out of it. 7 minutes later, I'd written Iris a note, brushed my hair and my teeth, and slid into a pair of jeans, but didn't bother to change out of Dante's t-shirt. What I hadn't done was decide what, if anything, to tell him about the situation with Enzo. I'd lied to him enough, and I hated to do it again, even by omission. But I had no idea what the results would show. How could I ever tell Dante about stealing Enzo's blood? About his mother and my father having an affair almost 30 years ago? Could I really implode an entire family based on Sophia's suspicions? Dante opened the door and all rational thought left my head. He wrapped his arms around my waist and lifted me off the ground. That was quick. I struggled to come up with a reply. We needed to talk, but I wanted something else entirely. I wanted him. Draping my arms around his shoulders, I leaned closer to kiss him. He eased his head back. We should finish clearing the air between us. We should. I'm sorry, we spoke in unison. Chuckling, he set me down and motioned for me to go first. I should have been honest with you at the masked ball, but I was too caught up in meeting you to think straight. Then when I figured out who you were, I didn't quite know how to put it all into words. I get it. It's taken me a couple of days to tease out what I know about you as a person versus what I know about your family. Same here. I dipped my chin. I was taught to believe the Marchionnis were ruthless and selfish. If I'd known you, or even your brothers, I would have realized I could have come to you for help instead of pretending to be someone else. Promise me there are no more lies. No matter what, you can be honest with me. Maybe I should burn the test results and forget all about them. My family has caused the Marchionnis enough trauma for 10 lifetimes. Why hurt him when I don't even know for sure? Praying I was making the right decision, I said, I promise. I know there's more to figure out, but our conversation might go smoother if we get rid of some of this tension. I loved the way his mind worked, but I worried he'd regret taking me to bed. More so, I worried I'd never want to leave. As if he read my mind, Dante whispered, I know the odds are stacked against us. Let me love you tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. How can I say no to that? Okay, sex first, talk later. My voice cracked. He carried me to the bedroom, set me on the edge of the mattress, and claimed my mouth. He kissed me with a tenderness I didn't expect. After the previous few days, the fact I was there with him overwhelmed me. I can't let him go, but I can't see a way forward. Breaking the kiss, he slid his t-shirt off, but stopped as if he'd sensed my indecision, or more likely felt it. Are you having second thoughts? No, not about this. I trailed my fingertips down his chest. Good. Caressing me as he went, he pulled the borrowed shirt over my head and kicked off his pants. My heart pounding and breaking, I held his gaze as he slid my jeans and thong down my legs. If I lived to be 100 years old, I'd never forget the look in his eyes. I'd never felt so beautiful, so cherished, so loved. Frankie. Dante cupped my cheek. Last names, family feuds, our unorthodox beginning, none of that matters. How can you say that? I hated myself for allowing my emotions to get in the way of what could be a beautiful night with Dante, but I couldn't help it. He pressed his brows to mine. Because I'm still me, and you're still you. You're right, but he placed his index finger on my lips. Stop worrying. Make me. I rested one hand on his chest, the other drifted down to his cock. Dante's breath hitched as he kissed me again. Before I could decide if his reaction was from lust, or if he was as conflicted as I was, he snaked his arm around me, lifted me up, and eased me down in the center of the bed. I broke the kiss, opened my eyes halfway, and brushed his hair back from his eyes. I love you. I love you too. Dante leaned forward, teasing my lips with his tongue. I curled my fingers in his hair and wrapped my legs around his waist, using my entire body to convey how much I wanted him, needed him. Is there something you want? He flashed me that devilish Marchionni grin. You. Now. Dante pulled a condom from the nightstand drawer and slid it on. When he positioned himself above me,
I expected him to kiss me again. Instead, he guided my legs over his shoulders and pressed forward until I was bent in two. The thrill of the first thrust stole both of our breaths. "You feel so damn good." Dante pulled back and pushed into me again before quickening the pace. There was nothing I could do in my position but enjoy him and mutter words like good and yes and more. I struggled to keep my eyes open, to memorize the contours of his face, his strong jaw, full lips, the way his muscles rippled with each thrust. Dante turned his head to kiss my calf and shifted himself higher up my body. The small change pushed me into oblivion. He smiled like a man that owned the world as he watched me go to pieces beneath him. I'd barely recovered when he held his breath, tensed, and followed me over the edge. For what seemed an impossibly long time after, Dante continued to move in a slow, easy rhythm. I let my legs fall from his shoulders to his arms and eventually to the bed. Wow. Dante stretched out beside me and pulled me to his side. "Is it naive to think we'll figure this out?" Nuzzling my face against his chest. "Maybe a little, but I believe in miracles." Chapter 20. Frankie. Heaven and hell wrapped up in one seriously hot package. That's how I would describe Dante Marchionni. Waking up in his arms was absolute bliss. Thinking about what our future held was complete agony. Or it would be when our families inevitably got in the way. And they will. It's only a matter of time. I'd be lying if I said I cared what Tommaso or my sisters thought. What business was it of theirs who I fell in love with? Dante, on the other hand, was close to his brothers. And judging by where he lived, where he worked, and where he spent his free time, he was close to his parents, too. I can't ask him to choose between me and his family any more than I can destroy their family on a hunch. Keeping the DNA test quiet was the right decision, at least until I knew the truth. If it turned out Enzo was my half-brother, I'd go to him in private. No one else, Abruzzo or Marchionni, needed to know. The choice belonged to Enzo. And if Enzo decided to go public, I desperately wanted to believe that no matter what the DNA showed, Dante and I would make it. To believe we had a future together. What can I say? Dante's kisses lowered my inhibitions better than tequila. One taste and my panties fell off. Which is why I couldn't risk another encounter with his lips. Besides, I had Iris downstairs, work to do, and DNA test results waiting. Easing away from him, I glanced at the clock, and a shot of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. Panicked, I shook his shoulder. "Dante, wake up! It's after 10. We overslept. You were supposed to go Christmas shopping with Enzo at 9. Rolling to his side, he threw his arm over me and muttered, "Sleep now. Sex later." I wiggled out from beneath his limb and glanced around for my phone. I'd left Iris a note, but if she'd missed it, she'd be worried sick. My clothes were scattered on the bedroom floor, but there was no sign of my phone. I picked through the wreckage of the night before. Dante's jeans laid near mine, but there was no sign of my cell. I vaguely remembered checking my message while he reheated leftover pasta, and not so vaguely remembered him eating me rather than the food. I walked into the kitchen and found my cell wedged beneath a forgotten plate of rigatoni. The battery was down to 20%. Not great, but not the end of the world. I made a mental note to charge it as soon as I returned to the apartment. Shaking my head, I checked my alerts. 2 messages from Iris, one from Mia, and another from Marco. Great, just great. Dante hadn't moved a muscle since I'd slipped out of bed. Sleeping half on his stomach, half on his side, he took up more than his fair share of the king-sized bed. My gaze lingered on the dips and valleys of his back. Not even Michelangelo could have sculpted a more beautiful man. I hated to leave without saying good morning or goodbye or thanks for an incredible night. And, by the way, that thing you did with your tongue was phenomenal. However, I didn't dare tempt fate. One kiss, and we wouldn't crawl back out of bed until Sunday. Rather than pulling a vanishing act, I fired off a quick text. Me. Did anyone ever tell you you're adorable when you talk in your sleep? See you soon. XOXO. I dressed quickly and ran my fingers through my hair. Then it hit me. I was free. As long as Kincaid or any of the guards who'd babysat me over the past few days didn't see me, I could leave the building. I could finally go to the lab and get the DNA results. My pulse raced at the thought of running into one of my brother's men downstairs. I had no idea if they were still in the city, but after the incident with Iris, I hoped they'd run back to Sicily. Tommaso had to know that Marco was aware of their presence. Just in case, I borrowed Dante's discarded hoodie and twisted my hair into a bun. It was a crummy disguise, but beggars and choosers and all of that. And then I remembered I'd left my purse downstairs. Shit. I slipped into the kitchen and called Iris.
Frankie? Where are you? I saw the note, but
I'm in the penthouse with Dante, but I need you to do me a huge favor. I hadn't stopped to think about what I'd tell her, so I went with the truth. Can you grab my purse and meet me at the side entrance to the restaurant downstairs? I have an errand to run. She made a humming sound that I assumed meant she didn't like the idea of me leaving the building. Please, Iris. I wouldn't go if it wasn't important. I added a little whine to my voice for good measure. What errand? Her tone reminded me of Sophia. Surprising for the usually mousy computer nerd. The first thought that popped into my over-orgasmed brain fell out my mouth. I need to pick up birth control pills from the clinic at Tulane. I'll see you in 5. Iris giggled like a tween girl. Rather than risking running into one of Kincaid's men in the elevator, I took the stairs to the ground floor. True to her word, Iris was waiting by the exit. She took one look at me and burst out laughing. Good grief! Did you have a quickie between now and the time we hung up? Stairs. I pressed one hand to my chest to calm my racing heart and took my purse from her with the other. She held on to the strap, as if debating snatching the bag and running back upstairs. Be careful. Please. Promise me. I promise. I couldn't help but smile. It was nice to have someone I wasn't related to or sleeping with care about me. And hurry. I can't lie for shit. I'll panic if security realizes you're missing. She gave me a quick hug and slipped back inside. I slipped the crossbody purse over my head and stepped outside. The side door opened to a walkway that gave me a direct shot to the streetcar stop. I'd spent so much time indoors, the first blast of cold air went straight through my chest and into my lungs. On the plus side, the icy wind made my slumped shoulders and hood less conspicuous. Normally, I loved winter. I'd seen snow for the first time while away at boarding school. While my classmates had huddled beside the fire, I'd stayed outside until my clothes were soggy and I couldn't feel my toes. But this year was different. All I wanted for Christmas was more time with Dante, and my sisters to have the chance to fall in love too. I spent the ride to Tulane Medical Center glancing over my shoulder for my brother's goons. It seemed like a muscular man dressed in black stood on every corner, peered through every window, walked down every sidewalk. I'd never noticed how many dark-haired Mediterranean-complexioned men lived in the freaking city. The streetcar came to a stop, and my pulse shot into the stratosphere. The short walk to the entrance was the longest of my life. Not only was I looking over my shoulder for mafiosi, I couldn't shake the feeling I was about to make a huge mistake. What if it's positive? What if I go to Enzo and he flips out? Tells Dante I stole his blood and forged his name on the lab docs? What if he refuses to help our sisters? I walked into the lab nauseous and confused. It took all of 5 minutes, a signature and flashing my fake driver's license to receive the test results. A singular piece of paper with the potential to save and destroy countless lives. I ducked into a restroom and opened the sealed envelope like my grandmother used to open Christmas presents, careful not to rip the paper. The report itself was far more colorful than I'd anticipated. Pink, yellow, blue, and green rows with words like allele and locus, and alphanumeric codes that were nothing but gibberish to me. What the heck is a combined sibling index? 67? That's failing, right? I blew out a breath, unsure if I was disappointed or relieved. And then I read the final paragraph. DNA testing was done to determine siblingship of alleged siblings. Based on the testing results, blah, 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 the probability of half-siblingship is 98.5%. Holy crap! The implications of what I'd discovered felt like concrete in my lungs. That's it. The last few nails in mine and Dante's relationship coffin. Not only had I kept my suspicions about Enzo from him, the information had the potential to implode his family. And Enzo? How is he going to feel about this? What about the rest of the Marchionnis? His mother? The man he considers his father? What will this news do to a dying man? I called Sophia, but as it had for days, her phone went straight to voicemail. I didn't dare leave a message. If my fears were right, Tommaso had found her and taken her back to Sicily. While I hated the thought of turning to Mia for advice, I had no choice. I dialed her number. Frankie! Her shrill voice threatened to perforate my eardrum. Where are you? Are you still with Dante? I've been worried sick. Tommaso knows you and Sophia are in New Orleans. Damn it. I pressed my back against the bathroom wall. Is that why he was here? Yes. No thanks to that video of you and Dante Marchionni. She made that tisking sound she was so fond of. What were you thinking? I didn't have the energy to get into the Danny-Dante thing with her again. Nor did I want a lecture. Does he have Sophia? I haven't been able to reach her in days. No, my informant would have told me if she'd returned. She sighed. But I'm worried, too. I haven't talked to her in over a week. Let's hope for the best. Sophia is more than capable of taking care of herself. I'd tried for optimistic, but it felt more like a lie. Did you get the DNA results? My heart gave a weak thump, like it had died a little. Yes. Muffled male voices came over the line as if people had walked into the room with my sister. Odd, considering she was in hiding. Well, what did they say? Mia sounded as exasperated as I felt, but I suspected her reaction was for a very different reason. Could she be working with our brother? Is that where her information is coming from? I wanted to chalk my reaction up to my chronic need to catastrophize my problems, but my gut instinct told me otherwise. They were inconclusive. The tech said we should run them again and include one or both mothers in the samples. I lied like a good little mob princess, with a freaking smile on my face. Mia went quiet. Too quiet. I couldn't tell if the call had dropped or if she'd muted me. Either way, I hung up. I didn't have enough battery left to waste another second. Shoving the envelope in my pocket, I exited the opposite side of the building to catch the streetcar to the French Quarter. I needed to have a difficult conversation with my newly discovered sibling. Once on board, I pulled out my phone to double-check my call log, but an alert caught my attention. I'd programmed my AI security software to notify me anytime it detected an abnormality. I clicked on the link and pulled up the footage the computer had deemed questionable. The timestamp told me whatever had triggered the alert had happened a couple of hours earlier. Better late than never, I guess. The footage loaded, and I watched as Enzo opened the back door of his restaurant and spoke to a blonde woman. 2 seconds later, the side of her head exploded. Oh my God! While he didn't appear injured, he seemed stunned. So stunned, he'd knelt to help her instead of ducking for cover. I knew the shooting had happened earlier in the day, but I found myself mentally pleading with Enzo to get inside. Fears, questions, too many emotions to even begin to process flooded me and short-circuited my brain. A second alert popped up on my screen. The new footage came from a different camera angle. It showed Pasquale Puglisi, one of my brother's attack dogs, walking away from the scene. How is that possible? How many men does Tommaso have left in the city? Was Dante there? They were supposed to go Christmas shopping. Is he okay? Sooner or later, Pasquale would realize he'd missed and go back to finish the job. Try as I might, I couldn't slow my thoughts. But I managed to settle on one singular goal: to get to the restaurant. I dialed Dante's number, but the screen went dark. Shit. More and more people crowded into the trolley at each subsequent stop until I found myself pressed against the cold glass windows. Christmas time in New Orleans should have been wonderful, but I barely noticed the decorations outside. All I could think about was Enzo. The article hadn't named a victim or given many details other than one person had been killed, and the restaurant was closed while authorities conducted the investigation. I'd just found out I had a half-brother. I wasn't prepared to lose him. I exited the streetcar at Canal and Royal Streets and followed a couple dozen tourists into the French Quarter. When I thought of traffic, I generally thought of cars clogging roadways. While there were plenty of vehicles, there were 4 times as many people on the sidewalks. What would have taken 5 minutes at a brisk walk had taken me 20 minutes of ducking and weaving through locals and tourists. I rounded the corner on Charters and choked back a sob. Emergency vehicles lined the street, but that didn't mean there were fewer people. If anything, the flashing lights had brought out spectators. "Excuse me," I wove around an elderly woman carrying an enormous shopping bag. A big guy with a tiny dog elbowed me. "Hey, watch where you're going!" "Sorry." Stepping out onto the street, I jogged past 2 New Orleans police vehicles. An officer blew his whistle and waved his arm at me. "Ma'am, I need you to get out of the roadway." I moved back to the sidewalk and merged into the river of pedestrians without making eye contact with anyone. To my left, a man whispered in what sounded like Italian. Not the standard formal variety. He'd spoken in a mashup of a Neapolitan dialect and Sicilian. Every nerve ending in my body went on alert. I'd gone past the fight-or-flight response into utter shock. I glanced toward the sound of the voice without moving my head and risking making eye contact. Pasquale Puglisi. Until the video popped up on my phone, I hadn't seen him since my father's funeral. A second man I didn't recognize leaned in, whispered something to Pasquale, and nodded toward an alley. What were they doing here? If Enzo's injured, or worse, they would be headed in the other direction. I dropped back to put some distance between me and the men. They slipped down the narrow passage between 2 buildings, but I waited to make sure they weren't coming back out. The roar of an engine pulled my attention back to the road. A large black SUV screeched to a halt beneath the sign for Enzo's trattoria. I couldn't tell for certain, but it looked like the same make and model the Marchionni security team used. Raising to tiptoes, I waited for the driver to exit the vehicle. Police whistles blared. Up ahead, officers seemed to be attempting to clear the sidewalk near the SUV. A man and a woman emerged from another alley. He had his arm wrapped around her and her head pressed against his chest. I recognized his dark curls and strong jaw instantly. "Enzo!" Pushing my way forward, I shouted his name over and over. He glanced in my direction and skimmed the crowd. I waved my arms to get his attention. "Go inside! It's not safe!" Enzo stared at me for a heartbeat. I reached into my pocket for the test results, to use them like a flag, to get his attention, to make him understand it was important. The bark of gunshots tore through my eardrums and ricocheted through my skull. Enzo jolted from the impact and went down. Well, if it isn't little Frankie Abruzzo. Pasquale flashed me a shark smile. He and his accomplice stood several feet in front of me. I turned and dove into the sea of screaming, fleeing people.
This has been part 2 of Gin and Trouble, the Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club, Book 5. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Shedlock and Virginia Rose. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to Kathryn's channel where you can find part 3 of Gin and Trouble, along with more of Kathryn's paranormal and contemporary romance novels.